Chapter 443. Although the fire dragon you saw today has a snake's body, it's a dragon species. Everyone in our town knows about it, the man explained. According to the county records here, a fire dragon once became an immortal here in the Tang dynasty during the Zhenguan period. What you two saw today is the descendant of the immortal fire dragon. This is also the origin of the town's name. Less than 30 miles east of the town, there's a fire dragon temple. It enshrines the fire dragon immortal, the middle-aged woman said. That temple has existed for at least hundreds of years. Yi Fan frowned after hearing that. From what you said, the fire snake, oh no, the fire dragon we saw today doesn't harm people? It's the guardian of our fire dragon town. How can it harm people? The middle-aged man hurriedly said. You may not know this, but for hundreds of years, this fire dragon will appear beside the fire dragon temple at noon on the 9th day of the double 9th festival and kowtow to the fire dragon immortal. Is there such a thing? The middle-aged man's words made Yi Fan feel a little incredulous. 15 years ago, I saw it with my own eyes, the man said solemnly. At that time, I was still a child. My father led me to squeeze into the crowd, and stood on the sand dune to watch it from afar. Can we still see it on the double 9th festival now? Akatsuki asked. Now? Sigh, the middle-aged man sighed and said, we can't see it now. Why? Yi Fan asked. It's sad and no longer protects our fire dragon town, the middle-aged man said with a sad look. If it was still protecting our town, how could it be now? Sigh. The middle-aged man sighed deeply. Sad. Akatsuki, who was on the side, asked in confusion. The middle-aged man nodded. What's the matter? Yi Fan asked. You two may not know, but there was not only one fire dragon, but two. The middle-aged woman on the side saw her husband's sad face and explained to them. Two. Akatsuki was surprised. They are a couple, the middle-aged woman said. Husband and wife? Akatsuki was shocked again. Yes. The middle-aged woman nodded. The middle-aged woman's words didn't surprise Yi Fan. All such fays were in pairs. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to reproduce. The 1,000-year-old ice snake in the northernmost glacier was like this, and the fire snake here was no exception. Was the fire snake we saw today male or female? Yi Fan asked. Although he had learned from the couple that the fire snake was a dragon species, it had not yet evolved into a dragon, so it was more appropriate to call it a fire snake. It's a male. The middle-aged man lowered his head and said, the female is dead. Dead? Yi Fan frowned when he heard that. How did he die? He was killed, the middle-aged man said in a low voice. His chest was cut open and his body was left in the desert. Many people saw it. Yi Fan frowned when he heard that. Why? Akatsuki couldn't bear it and asked, why did he kill it? What else could it be? The middle-aged man raised his head, looking sad and indignant. The male dragon's dragon pearl and the female dragon's inner core. The middle-aged man's words caused Yi Fan to be shocked. Inner core. The fire snake's inner core. Could the fire snake's inner core in his body belong to the female snake? Who killed the fire snake? Yi Fan asked with a frown. Westerners. The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. 3 Westerners killed the female dragon. Westerners. Yi Fan's pupils shrank when he heard these 3 words. The fire snake's inner core in his body really did belong to the female snake. Yi Fan suddenly understood why the fire snake didn't attack him. He also understood why it could predict his attack intentions in advance. The reason was simple. The inner core of its wife was in his body. The reason why the male snake had the upper hand was not only because it had 1,000 years of cultivation, but also because of the inner core. The inner core was the manifestation of essence, energy, and spirit. The inner core in his body contained almost all of the female snake's essence, energy, and spirit. The fire snake couple had been together for nearly 1,000 years. They couldn't be any more familiar with each other's aura. Now that the inner core was in his body, no matter what he did, the inner core's aura would be enough for the male snake to predict it in advance. As the saying goes, know thyself and know thy enemy, and thou shalt be victorious in every battle. If his attack intentions were completely grasped by his opponent, no matter how fast his movements were or how fierce his moves were, it would be useless and useless. When did this happen? Yi Fan asked the middle-aged man. This happened 15 years ago, the middle-aged man recalled with a sad face. Since then, the fire dragon never appeared in the fire dragon temple again. It also stopped protecting this town. Sigh, what a sin. Chapter 444. After Yi Fan listened to the words of the two people, he began to sympathize with the fire dragon. He had personally experienced the pain of losing his wife. That kind of feeling was simply unable to live, unable to die. It was so painful that he wished he was dead. The fire dragon was originally wholeheartedly protecting the humans, but in the end, the humans cut open its wife's belly and forcibly took her inner core. It was not the fire dragon who did such a thing, but the humans. Yi Fan suddenly felt that he was somewhat in the same boat as the fire dragon. They both lost their wives and were full of anger. The female snake's inner core was taken, and she died in the underworld. The 3 souls of his beloved wife were captured, and her life was uncertain. The fire dragon gave up its original intention, and its heart was like dead ashes. It threw away everything, and its will was like a dead tree. In order to take revenge on the humans, the fire dragon's ferocious nature took hundreds of lives in an instant. In order to avenge his wife, it started a massacre, and the number of lives that died at its hands numbered in the hundreds. At this time, Yi Fan was not angry with the fire dragon that he had fought before. Instead, he felt a sense of sympathy. It seems that the fire dragon also hated because of love, so it killed passers-by. After listening to all that the middle-aged couple said, Akatsuki couldn't help but sigh. Killed passers-by? Akatsuki's words made the middle-aged couple look at each other, puzzled. Seeing this situation, Akatsuki told the couple about the hundreds of bones found in the desert in the afternoon. The couple was stunned at first, then they shook their heads. No, the middle-aged man spoke first. Although the dragon god is completely disappointed in humans, it would never do such a thing. The dragon god has never hurt other small animals in the desert, let alone humans. This matter is definitely not what you two said. Why are you so sure that it was not done? Then how do you explain its appearance next to the bones? Yi Fan asked the middle-aged man. This matter is definitely not done by the dragon god, the man said to Yi Fan. For hundreds of years, I have only heard of the dragon god appearing to save people, but I have never heard of it hurting people. Maybe it's taking revenge on humans? Akatsuki asked. That's impossible, the middle-aged man continued. If that was the case, the dragon god could have just come to the town and slaughtered everyone. Why would he go through so much trouble? Yi Fan and Akatsuki did not respond. The middle-aged man's words were not without reason. He was right. With fire snake's 1,000 years of cultivation, it would only take him an instant to wipe out the entire town. There was no need for him to ambush passers-by in the desert. As for the dragon god's appearance near the bones, that doesn't mean anything. With all due respect, the middle-aged man said as he cupped his fist at Yi Fan. If a third party had appeared at that time, would they have thought that the two of you were responsible for this? No matter what, the two of you didn't see it with your own eyes. It's just your intuition. Yi Fan and Akatsuki looked at each other, but still did not speak. Also, Miss Akatsuki just said that Ishihara-san had fought with the dragon god. I'll take the liberty to ask you, the middle-aged man said as he looked at Yi Fan. Did the dragon god take the initiative to attack you? The middle-aged man's words directly hit the crux of the matter, leaving Yi Fan speechless and stunned on the spot. At this time, he was completely convinced and had nothing to say. The reason was very simple. Akatsuki had just told the middle-aged man about his fight with the fire snake and did not mention the specific details. However, this man had directly guessed the fact that the fire snake did not take the initiative to attack him. All the signs indicated that he had misunderstood the fire snake. Thinking of this, Yi Fan could not help but feel regretful. Not only had he forced the crime of murder onto the fire snake, but he had also stabbed it with the snake's shadow sword. If not for the fire snake's profound cultivation and foresight of his intention to attack, it might have already died under his snake's shadow sword. If that was really the case, then his sin was simply unforgivable. What made Yi Fan feel even more guilty was that he was suppressing the Naiden of the fire snake's wife in his body. However, the fire snake had actually restrained itself in the face of his unreasonable provocation and had not taken the initiative to attack him. Compared to the fire snake, he was simply a villain from head to toe. Thinking of this, Yi Fan stood up from his seat. He made a decision that would make him atone for his sins. He would find the fire snake and apologize to it to atone for his sins. Also, he would return the 1,000-year-old Naiden that belonged to the fire snake's wife in his body to its rightful owner. Seeing Yi Fan stand up, the middle-aged man immediately stood up and looked at Yi Fan apologetically. He thought that he had said something wrong and had offended Yi Fan. He now somewhat regretted speaking too bluntly just now. "Taro, what's wrong with you?" Akatsuki also felt that Yi Fan's reaction was somewhat strange. "Chuyue, you and Xiao Zhao stay here, I'm going out." Yi Fan turned his head and said to Akatsuki, "Going out?" When Akatsuki heard that Yi Fan was going out alone, she immediately stood up. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to the desert," Yi Fan said. "To the desert? Now?" Akatsuki did not understand why Yi Fan would suddenly do this. Chapter 445. "I'll go with you," Akatsuki said to Yi Fan as she picked up the red sword on the table. Although she didn't know why Yi Fan wanted to go to the desert at this time, she still decided to go with Yi Fan. "Akatsuki, you and Xiao Zhao stay here," Yi Fan said as he reached out and pressed down on Akatsuki's sword. "There are only 2 days left until the deadline set by the two evil beings. It's better for you to stay here and take care of their safety. Although there's a spirit barrier here, you still have to be careful. If you're here, I'll be more at ease." "But you're alone." Akatsuki still wanted to insist. "Don't worry, I'm fine. I'll be back in 2 hours at most," Yi Fan said to Akatsuki. "Then, be careful," Akatsuki said with concern. "I'll wait for you to come back." At this time, her tone was as if she and Yi Fan were really husband and wife. Yi Fan frowned after hearing this. Akatsuki's words reminded him of his beloved wife, Fujiwara no Chiko. Perhaps it was because they were both Japanese, but their tones, attitudes, and even voices were very similar. In addition, their eyes were almost exactly the same as Fujiwara no Chiko's. Yi Fan vaguely felt as if his beloved wife was standing in front of him at this time. However, this was only a matter of a moment. Yi Fan quickly regained his senses from this illusion. He nodded to Akatsuki and turned to leave the room. After leaving the room, Yi Fan didn't use the cloud riding technique. Instead, he directly activated the spirit power in his body and used a peerless movement technique. Whoosh! The moment Yi Fan stepped out of the room, his body disappeared in an instant. In the tavern, the couple's mouths instantly turned into an O shape. The middle-aged man rubbed his eyes a few times. He couldn't believe that a living person could disappear into thin air in the blink of an eye. Akatsuki quickly walked to the door. She held the door frame with her hand and looked up at the sky. Above Yikong, a 5-colored light quickly streaked across the sky, leaving a long afterimage. In the vast Yikong, Yi Fan's figure quickly passed through the clouds and went straight to the heart of the desert. Compared to daytime, it was much easier to find the fire snake at night. During the day, the sun was scorching hot in the sky, the entire desert was like a huge brazier. The fire snake's body was extremely hot. If it was hidden under the hot sand, it wouldn't be easy to find, it would be difficult to find it. But when it was night time, things would be much easier to handle. There was a huge difference in temperature between day and night. The hot sand during the day would become as cold as water at night. This way, the extremely high temperatures bodies was a very obvious heat source. As long as the heat source, the fire, high in the sky, Yi Fan flew at high speed while carefully perceiving the changes in the temperature of the desert below. The desert was quiet, there wasn't even a trace of wind. It was the 12th day of the lunar calendar. The moon hanging over the desert was almost full. The cold light poured over the desert, creating a unique scenery. With 20% of his spiritual power, Yi Fan used less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea to arrive at the heart of the desert where he had encountered the fire snake during the day. Shwa! High in the sky, Yi Fan's figure flashed, and he instantly stood on the desert. The cool breeze Mingyu, the desert's yellow sand. Yi Fan stood alone on the yellow sand, facing the three people Mingyu. From the tavern to here, he had found a lot of heat sources. But those were some common desert animals, lizards, gerbils, scorpions, and so on. There weren't any obvious large heat sources. Since he couldn't perceive the heat source, he could only listen. The fire snake's body was very big. Even the slightest movement would make a big noise. Thinking of this, Yi Fan quietly closed his eyes and listened attentively to all the sounds in the desert. Because there were few people here, the air was dry, and the noise was much less than in other places. It was very advantageous for Yi Fan to distinguish the sound. Sha sha sha. Sure enough, with Yi Fan's keen hearing, a continuous rustling sound entered his ears. This sound was very loud, and it didn't stop. Moreover, it was moving very fast. It didn't sound like the sound of other desert animals. It was the fire snake. Yi Fan opened his eyes. Shwa! Yi Fan once again used his movement technique and flew high in the sky. The sound of the fire snake moving across the sea of sand was about 300 miles away from him. If Yi Fan wanted to, he would be able to arrive above the fire snake in an instant. But Yi Fan didn't do this. He wanted to see for himself if the fire snake really didn't hurt people like the middle-aged couple said. At this time, Yi Fan was already above the clouds, and he was more than 10,000 feet away from the desert below. At this distance, the fire snake couldn't find him at all. Yi Fan, who was above the clouds, activated his eyesight and looked in the direction of the sound. Hua! 300 miles away, the 1,000-year-old fire snake, which was hundreds of feet long and looked like a dragon, was moving its huge body, winding its way across the endless sea of sand. The cold moonlight poured down from the night sky, illuminating the red scales on the fiery serpent's body and making them sparkle. Chapter 446. It was already late at night, and all kinds of nocturnal creatures in the desert began to come out to look for food. There were fast-crawling lizards, spitting sand snakes, timid but agile gerbils, poisonous scorpions, and wolves crossing the desert from next door. When these desert animals saw the red light emitted by the fire snake from afar, they immediately stopped looking for food and obediently crawled on both sides of the desert, as if they had seen their king. The lizards stopped hissing, the sand snakes lowered their heads, the timid gerbils stopped chewing, and the wolves all lay on the ground with their heads on their front paws. Even the poisonous scorpions with their tails raised up obediently put down their tails and quickly closed their big pincers, becoming motionless. In the blink of an eye, all kinds of animals were neatly crawling on both sides of the desert, stretching for several miles. They stopped looking for food, stopped fighting each other, and respectfully bowed to the fire snake that was passing by this desert. The scene in front of him made Yi Fan, who was above the clouds, frown. Everything was as the middle-aged couple had said. The fire snake did not attack other weak animals. If it was really aggressive, these animals would have already fled in all directions, and would not have shown such respectful etiquette. Looking at the scabbed wound on the fire snake's body that he had made with the snake's shadow sword, Yi Fan's heart was filled with guilt. Whoosh! Whoosh! The fire snake passed through the crowd of animals and continued to crawl forward. It could be seen that it was hurrying through the night. Where would it go at this time of night? Yi Fan thought. This fire snake was the complete opposite of the ice snakes in the northernmost glaciers. The ice snakes liked the cold, and their nests were all under the glaciers. The fire snake liked the heat, and its nest should be under the desert. The yellow sand in the desert had been exposed to the sun for an entire day, and the temperature was extremely high. Although the sand on the surface had cooled down at night, the depths of the desert were still very warm. This fire snake did not rest in its warm nest at this time of night, but came out to hurry. There must be something special. Thinking of the difficult situation of Flaming Dragon Town, Yi Fan decided to continue following the fire snake and see where it was going. The man and the snake continued their journey in their own ways. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the huge body of the fire snake stopped in front of a tall temple. The temple was completely built with stone materials, with cornices and arches, giving off a magnificent aura. In front of the temple, a pair of huge stone lighthouses were lined up on both sides. They were exquisitely carved and quaint. Above the entrance of the temple, there was a huge stone plaque hanging on it, with the words Fire Dragon Temple written in ancient gilded seal script. Fire Dragon Temple? Above the clouds, Yi Fan frowned. Shopkeeper Du had told him that every 9 days, Fiery Snake would come here and kowtow to immortal Fire Dragon, who was enshrined there. After that, Fire Snake lost his partner and no longer trusted humans. From then on, he never appeared in front of the Fire Dragon Temple again. Now, it seemed that things were not as what Manager Du had described. The Fire Snake would still come here to worship its ancestor, Immortal Fire Dragon. However, it would no longer appear in front of people. Instead, it would choose to do so in the dead of night. Buzz. Just as Yi Fan was making guesses in his heart, the fire serpent that was coiled up in front of the temple's entrance suddenly glowed with a bright red light. The dragon orb that was floating above its forehead shone even brighter. Swoosh! Amidst the dazzling light, the huge body of the fire snake shrank in an instant. The originally 300 zhang long body turned into a 10 zhang long red snake in the blink of an eye. As expected of a dragon species, it could change its size, rise and fall. Above the clouds, Yi Fan praised in his heart. He understood the intention of the fire snake. The reason why the fire snake shrank its body was to enter the fire dragon temple in front of him. Although this fire dragon temple was incomparably magnificent, it was still too small for the huge body of the fire snake. After the fire snake shrank, the dragon pearl on its forehead became 3 inches long. It lifted its tail and gently swung it at the huge temple door. Creak! The huge temple door slowly opened. The fire snake swayed its body and slithered in. The temple door closed again. Above the clouds, Yi Fan saw the fire snake enter the fire dragon temple and immediately activated his movement technique. Whoosh! Yi Fan's figure disappeared in an instant and reappeared above the desert in an instant. He slowly walked to the front of the temple door and stood there motionlessly, quietly waiting for the fire snake to come out. It was now kowtowing to its ancestors, so he couldn't rashly go in and disturb it. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the temple door slowly opened again. A burst of red light shone from the temple door. Immediately afterward, the fire snake with the red pearl on its head slowly crawled out. Yi Fan standing in front of the fire snake didn't surprise it. Actually, when Yi Fan descended from the clouds just now, it had already sensed the aura of its beloved wife's inner core when it was kowtowing to its ancestors in the Fire Dragon Temple. It seemed that this young man wouldn't give up until he got rid of it. Thinking of this, the fire snake closed the temple door with its tail and slowly slithered toward Yi Fan. Yi Fan calmly looked at the fire snake that was getting closer and closer, feeling guilty in his heart again. His wife's inner core was suppressed in his body, and then he indiscriminately attacked and injured the other party. This made him feel extremely ashamed. The fire snake stopped 10 meters away from Yifan. Chapter 447. I've wrongly accused you today, Yifan said as he took off the hat on his head. I've come to ask for your forgiveness. As Yifan spoke, he knelt down on one knee. What was right, and what was wrong. This matter was his fault from beginning to end. Since he was wrong, he should bring a bramble and ask for forgiveness. There was no room for ambiguity. The fire serpent general tilted his head in surprise. It had never imagined that this young man with such profound cultivation would actually come to apologize to it. It seemed that he already knew the truth of the matter. The fire snake calmly looked at the silver-haired young man kneeling in front of it. Its heart was filled with complex emotions. Its wife's inner core was inside this young man's body. When it thought of how its wife had been cut open and her inner core forcibly taken, the fire snake's eyes suddenly flashed with a red light. Although it had never taken the initiative to attack humans, it didn't mean that it wasn't angry. The fire snake's anger was completely within Yifan's expectations. If it were anyone else, they would be burning with rage. This inner core in my body belongs to your wife. Today, I'm returning it to you. As Yifan spoke, he began to mobilize the spiritual energy in his sea of qi. Buzz. Yifan's chest began to emit an intense red light. Under the guidance of Yifan's spiritual energy, the fire snake's inner core, which was continuously rotating in the shape of a yin-yang fish, gradually stopped chasing after the ice snake's inner core. It began to slowly leave the yin-yang diagram and slowly move upwards along Yifan's meridians. As the red light from Yifan's chest gradually moved upwards, Yifan's head also began to shine with a red light. When the red light reached Yifan's chin, Yifan opened his mouth. Whoosh! 10,000 rays of red light spurted out from Yifan's mouth. Immediately after, a fire snake's inner core the size of a pigeon's egg flew out of Yifan's mouth slowly. It was glowing with a red light and was overflowing with colors. When Yifan absorbed Sakita's Niden into his own body, it was just a ball of fire spirit qi. It was extremely violent and had no physical form, so it was impossible to expel it out of his body. However, after the fire snake Niden entered Yifan's body, it was wrapped in spiritual energy by Yifan. Nadens were condensed from spiritual energy, and under the nourishment of Yifan's tyrannical and pure spiritual energy, as well as the nourishment of Yifan's blood essence, the fire snake Niden began to gradually regain its physical form. Not only did its spiritual energy increase, but its violent temper also lessened. Yifan circulated it with the fire snake's ice Niden, using the Taiji yin-yang diagram. There was yang in yin and yin in yang. They complemented each other, and the yin and yang were in harmony. Naturally, the violent aura of the fire snake's Niden was neutralized by the Taiji yin-yang diagram. It was his wife's Niden. As soon as the dazzling Niden appeared, the fire snake's eyes immediately widened. It had been 15 years. His beloved wife had left him for 15 whole years. Tears welled up in the fire snake's eyes. After the Niden left Yifan's body, it instantly turned into a red light and charged directly at the fire snake. The moment it left Yifan's sea of qi, it sensed the presence of the male fire snake. Although it wasn't the female fire snake's soul, it was the essence of the female fire snake's spiritual energy. It couldn't be more familiar with the aura of the male fire snake. Whoosh! The fire snake's Niden stopped in front of the male fire snake. Then, it circled around the male fire snake, shining brilliantly. After circling around the male fire snake 3 times, the Niden hovered in front of the male fire snake. The male fire snake's eyes were filled with tenderness, and tears welled up in them. It gently moved its head closer to the Niden hovering in front of it. Then, it used its forehead to gently touch the Niden. Looking at the Niden reminded it of its wife. This Niden allowed it to once again feel the aura of its wife. Yi Fan, who was kneeling on one knee, was deeply moved by the scene in front of him. He slowly took off the white jade mask on his face. His eyes were red. "I've returned the Niden to you. Now it's time to return the favor." As Yi Fan spoke, he stretched out his hand and pulled out the snake shadow sword that was coiled around his waist. The teary-eyed fire snake raised its head and looked at Yi Fan with a hint of surprise in its eyes. Whoosh! With a flick of his wrist, Yi Fan held the treasured sword upside down. Then, he directly pierced the snake shadow sword towards his left arm. Buzz! The snake shadow sword, which was brimming with cold energy, instantly sensed Yi Fan's intention to harm himself. When the tip of the sword was less than 3 inches away from Yi Fan's left arm, it suddenly stopped. Buzz! The snake shadow sword's body trembled and emitted a crisp sound. It was preventing Yi Fan from harming itself. Yi Fan frowned and immediately exerted strength in his hand. Although the snake shadow sword was full of spiritual energy, it was still sealed. At this moment, its strength was unable to stop Yi Fan. Pooh! Blood splattered everywhere. The incomparably sharp snake shadow sword instantly pierced through Yi Fan's left arm and came out through the bone. His pure white robe was immediately dyed the color of blood. Buzz! The snake shadow sword that had pierced through Yi Fan's left arm let out a whimper. Then, it automatically pulled itself out of Yi Fan's left arm. At the same time, it began to emit cold energy. The snake shadow sword was protecting its master. Although it couldn't prevent Yi Fan from harming itself, it could use its cold energy to seal Yi Fan's wound in ice. This would stop the bleeding. Crack! As the snake shadow sword was gradually pulled out, Yi Fan's left arm was instantly covered in a thin layer of ice. Chapter 448. When the snake shadow sword pierced the fire snake's body, the wound didn't immediately heal. It wasn't because the fire snake's cultivation wasn't enough, but because the snake shadow sword was the nemesis of the fire snake. The biting cold air directly entered the fire snake's wound, which directly caused the wound to not completely heal in a short period of time. It could only let the wound naturally form a scab. Although the fire snake's wound looked fine on the surface, Yi Fan knew that the depths of the fire snake's wound still hadn't healed. Since the fire snake's wound was like this, then his own wound should also be like this. This was only fair. In fact, even if the snake shadow sword didn't use the cold air to stop Yi Fan's bleeding, the pure spiritual energy in Yi Fan's body would automatically heal the wound. It was just that Yi Fan used his mind to stop the spiritual energy in his arm's meridians, so the wound would still continue to bleed. Buzz! The snake shadow sword trembled and hummed incessantly. "It's okay, I won't die," Yi Fan said to the snake shadow sword as he put it back on his waist. Drip, drip, drip. Blood flowed out of his left arm and dripped down from Yi Fan's fingers onto the desert, and the yellow sand under his feet began to turn dark red. The fire snake calmly looked at everything in front of it, and the anger in its eyes began to gradually dissipate. It didn't think that the silver-haired young man in front of it would do such a thing. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Yi Fan stood up, stepped on the yellow sand, and walked step by step towards the fire snake. The blood dripping down from his arm drew a line of blood in the yellow sand under his feet. The fire snake didn't move, and calmly looked at Yi Fan walking towards it. Yi Fan arrived in front of the fire snake, squatted down, and put his palm on the wound on the fire snake's tail. He wanted to heal the fire snake. Buzz! As Yi Fan mobilized the spiritual energy in his body, a large ball of gentle white light suddenly gushed out from the center of his palm. First, he absorbed the remaining cold energy from the snake's shadow sword into his own body. Then, he continuously injected his spirit energy into the fire snake's wound. The surging white light illuminated Yi Fan's determined face, as well as fire snake's astonished eyes. Whoosh! Under the nourishment of Yi Fan's pure spiritual energy, the fire snake's wound healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, the fire snake's wounds were healed. "I've paid back everything I owed you." Yifan slowly stood up and looked at Fire Snake. "We're even now." After that, Yifan turned around and prepared to leave. Hiss! The fire snake's hissing came from behind. It was obvious that it was calling out to Yifan. Yifan, who was constantly bleeding, turned around and calmly looked at Fire Snake. Buzz! The dragon ball above Fire Snake's head suddenly glowed with a red light and kept rotating. Buzz! A slender red beam of light shot out from the dragon ball and went straight for Yifan. If it was any other time, Yifan would have opened his spiritual energy barrier and quickly dodged. But this time, Yifan didn't do anything. He just quietly closed his eyes. The fire snake probably felt that it wasn't enough and wanted to make another move. However, things didn't happen as Yifan imagined. He didn't feel any pain. Instead, he felt that the pain from the wound on his left arm was gradually disappearing. Yifan immediately opened his eyes. After opening his eyes, Yifan immediately frowned. There was a red light on his left arm. Buzz! The fire snake's red beam of light shot directly at the wound on his left arm. His wound was quickly healing. It was healing him. Yifan's heart skipped a beat. He raised his head and looked at the fire snake with a shocked expression. Whoosh! As the wound on Yifan's left arm gradually healed, the fire snake withdrew the red light from the dragon ball and calmly looked at Yifan. Its eyes were clear and there was no longer any anger. Yifan wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. The fire snake repaid evil with good. This made Yifan feel inferior. Hiss! Hiss! The fire snake hissed twice at Yifan. Then, it turned around and slithered toward the fire dragon temple. While slithering, it kept looking back at Yifan. Yifan understood the fire snake's meaning. It wanted him to follow it. Yifan stepped forward and followed the fire snake into the fire dragon temple with a puzzled expression. One man and one snake, one after the other, entered the main hall. Inside the main hall, there were intricately carved walls and beams. It was grand yet elegant, simple yet dignified. In the center of the main hall, a bronze platform with auspicious clouds came into view. The bronze platform had an antique flavor. It was gilded with flowing clouds, flames, auspicious clouds, and auspicious beasts engraved on it. It was obvious that it was from the previous dynasty. On top of the platform, there was a bronze statue that was more than 10 feet tall. The bronze statue had a dragon head and a human body. It wore immortal robes and held a jade tablet in its hand. It had a sage-like demeanor. 5 feet above the bronze statue, there was a golden canopy that was more than 10 feet tall. It was embroidered with colorful, auspicious clouds. It was extremely beautiful. Right below the bronze statue, there was a large bronze altar table in front of it. On top of it, there was an extremely exquisite gilded tablet with the words Fire Spirit True Lord written in ancient gilded seal script. The ancient seal script was written with vigorous strokes and flowed naturally. It was obvious that it was written by a master. This fire dragon temple was really imposing. Bouffon, as expected of a temple of immortals. Yifan looked around and exclaimed in his heart. Almost every item here was hundreds of years old. Each of them was a rare treasure from the previous dynasty. Any one of them was worth thousands of gold. Chapter 449. The fire snake stopped in front of the statue of the true Lord of Fire Dragon. It turned its head to look at Yifan, who was standing behind it. Then, it turned back to look at the huge incense tube on the altar. It was indicating that it should offer incense to the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Yifan thought to himself. Yifan took a look at the fire snake, then at the statue of the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Then, he slowly walked in front of the statue of the true Lord of Fire Dragon and took out 3 incense sticks from the golden incense tube. After lighting the incense sticks with the flames of the thick red candles, Yifan respectfully bowed 3 times to the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Then, He held the incense sticks in his hand and silently communicated with the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Disciple Yi Fan is here to find the whereabouts of the divine cauldron in order to save my beloved wife. Yi Fan closed his eyes and placed the 3 incense sticks between his eyebrows. He silently prayed to the true Lord of Fire Dragon in his heart. Due to my stupidity, I accidentally hurt the true Lord of Fire Dragon. Please forgive me. After sincerely praying, Yi Fan placed the 3 incense sticks in the purple copper incense burner. Then, he kowtowed 3 times to the statue of the true Lord of Fire Dragon on the prayer mat. Since he had hurt the descendant of the true Lord of Fire Dragon, he had to report it to the true Lord of Fire Dragon and apologize. After doing all this, Yi Fan stood up. Whoosh! The moment Yi Fan stood up, the 3 incense sticks in the incense burner began to burn at a speed visible to the naked eye. Bang! The 1-foot-tall incense sticks burned faster and faster. In the end, there was even a flame. When the fire snake saw this, it immediately lowered its head and respectfully bowed. Buzz! Just as Yi Fan was puzzled, the true Lord of Fire Dragon under the canopy suddenly shone with a dazzling golden light. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, a huge golden ball of light appeared in front of Yi Fan and spun non-stop. The golden ball of light was about 3 meters in size. It shone with golden light and thousands of auspicious auras. The entire hall was instantly filled with an intoxicating fragrance. Whoosh! Yi Fan's loose white robes fluttered in the wind as the golden orb spun. Whoosh! The spinning speed of the golden ball of light became slower and slower until it finally came to a stop. Bang! The golden light scattered in all directions, and the golden light ball instantly turned into countless specks of golden light, sparkling and sparkling as they dispersed. Amidst the fragments of light, a middle-aged man with the demeanor of a transcendent being stood there with a smile. This person was wearing a soaring dragon crown on his head, a fiery red 9-dragon robe, a coiled dragon-inlaid jade belt around his waist, and a pair of cloud-stepping dragon shoes on his feet. His hair was as black as ink and his teeth were like jade. His eyes were like stars and his eyebrows were like swords. What a true immortal! Yi Fan sighed in his heart. He didn't even need to guess to know who the person in front of him was. Flying dragon crown, 9 dragons robe, coiled dragon jade belt, hornless dragon immortal shoes. From top to bottom, he was surrounded by auspicious air and surrounded by dragons. Who else could it be other than the true Lord of Fire Dragon? In fact, the moment the golden ball of light appeared, Yi Fan had already sensed a strong aura that was extremely masculine and domineering. Although his cultivation level was high and his spiritual energy was astonishing, this domineering aura still pressured him to the point that his breathing became a little rushed. Yi Fan understood that the reason why he had such a reaction was not because his cultivation level was not high enough, but because this was an innate reaction that everyone was born with. The majestic aura emitted by the golden light ball made people feel a kind of power that was not angry. That power was like an emperor, and no one could resist it. This was not the first time that Yi Fan felt this aura. Back then, when the white-robed dragon and Brother Kim made a bet in the ancestral house, the white-robed dragon summoned the water dragon, Shui Yuan, and gave the secret treasure, the Thunder Fire Pearl, to Shui Yuan. After swallowing the Thunder Fire Pearl, the water dragon instantly turned into a purple divine dragon that ruled the world. The majestic aura just now was almost the same as the feeling that the purple divine dragon gave him at that time. The dragon was the longest among hundreds of scales and the head of all living things. It was naturally majestic, and the dragon's aura was vast and mighty. It was normal for people to feel intimidated. No matter how high Yi Fan's cultivation level was, he was only one person and had yet to reach the immortal realm. The one who appeared in front of him was a true immortal from the upper realm, true monarch Fire Dragon. The dragon's aura that he released was even more supreme, so it was reasonable for Yi Fan to feel this way. Junior Yi Fan greets the true monarch. Seeing true monarch fire dragon appear, Yi Fan immediately knelt on the ground. Hiss! When Fire Snake saw the true body of the immortal ancestor, he immediately nodded his head and bowed to the true monarch. Ha ha ha! True monarch Fire Dragon, who was wearing a red robe with 9 dragons, saw Yi Fan kneel to him and immediately laughed loudly. I didn't expect that the famous Eldritch would bow to me. I'm really flattered. Quickly get up, quickly get up. Thank you, true monarch. As Yi Fan spoke, he stood up and respectfully stood with his hands by his side. You get up too, true monarch Fire Dragon said to Fire Snake, who was prostrating on the ground. Chapter 450. 300 years ago, your cultivation was heaven-defying. You fought 6 immortals alone. That was an eye-opener for me. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon smiled at Yi Fan. Your proud moon heavenly scripture is indeed powerful. It was able to withstand the attacks of 6 immortals. Since ancient times, no one else has been able to do that other than you. It can be said that no one has ever done it before, and no one will ever do it again. Yi Fan smiled awkwardly and did not reply. As far as he knew, he was both righteous and evil in his previous life. In the end, he lost his cultivation and self-destructed. It was not something to be proud of. I already know everything about you. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon looked at the silver-haired Yi Fan and smiled. Everything was fated in your previous life. You don't have to be too upset. Perfected Lord. Yi Fan heard Perfected Lord Fire Dragon's words and knelt on the ground again. Yi Fan pleads for Perfected Lord to give me some guidance and save my wife. The Perfected Lord Fire Dragon standing in front of him was a true perfected immortal from the upper realm. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Naturally, he would not let it go. You already know what you should know. You also know what you shouldn't know. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon said, as he helped Yi Fan up. What you should do now, didn't Qingqinzi already tell you? But with my current strength, I can't do it. Yi Fan frowned and said to Perfected Lord Fire Dragon. He did not directly mention the power of immortals. After all, Fire Snake was still by his side. He could not reveal the secrets of heaven. Everything is fated. You can't force it. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon said to Yi Fan. If you force it, it will only backfire. I can only tell you this much. Yi Fan furrowed his brows and nodded. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon was a member of the Heavenly Court. Naturally, he had to abide by the rules of the Heavenly Court. He could not say anything without permission. Otherwise, the consequences would be severe. Yi Fan firmly believed this. Qingqinzi had only said a few words to him, and the result was that his immortal record was stripped. One could imagine how strict the heavenly rules were. When I was in the lower realm, someone asked me to pass something to you, true monarch Fire Dragon said as he waved his sleeves in the air. A 5-inch-long object that shone with silver light instantly appeared in the air. This is... Yi Fan looked at the thing floating in front of him, his eyes shining with a strange light. The object in front of him was 5 inches long and 2 inches wide. It was engraved with double-sided Taotai patterns, and its entire body was silvery white in color. It was wrapped in propitious qi, and it was overflowing with light. For some reason, Yi Fan felt like he had seen this thing somewhere before, as if he had seen it before. This is one of the 9 scabbards of your Frost Dragon sword, Taotai. True Monarch Fire Dragon smiled at Yi Fan and said, now, it has finally returned to its rightful owner. 9 sheaths. It was Taotai, one of the 9 scabbards. After Yi Fan heard True Monarch Fire Dragon's words, he was overjoyed. No wonder he felt like he had seen this object before. Now, he understood that the material of the Taotai scabbards was exactly the same as the material of the snake's shadow sword at his waist. Before Brother Kim imparted the spiritual energy to him, he had told him about the 9 scabbards of the Frost Dragon sword. According to Brother Kim, The Frost Dragon sword was completely different from other divine weapons. The hilt of the Frost Dragon sword was in the shape of a silver dragon, while the scabbards were divided into 9 sections. They were in the shape of the 9 sons of the true dragon, taking the meaning of the 9 sons, suppressing the true dragon. Only the 9 sections of the scabbards could completely envelop the supreme cold chi emitted by the Frost Dragon sword. As the saying goes, a dragon has 9 sons, but each son is different. The 9 sons are Chunyo, Yazi, Chaofeng, Puleo, Swanee, Taotai, Swanee, and Chiwen. Chunyo loved music, and his shape could be seen on musical instrument. Yazi loved to kill, and his weapons were often engraved with his patterns. Chaofeng loved to take risks, and he had the merit of deterring demons and avoiding disasters. Puleo Feng loved to ring, and his voice was as loud as a bell, reverberating through the clouds. Swanee loved to smoke, and it liked to sit. It liked to be quiet and did not like to move. It was one of the ferocious beasts, and it was often seen on incense burners. Taotai was a gluttonous beast with a fierce temperament, and its patterns were often seen on utensils. Swanee was one of the divine beasts. It was shaped like a tiger, and it liked to fight evil. It could distinguish between right and wrong, and it had the power to suppress evil and exorcise demons. Swanee was also known as Bashya. It was shaped like a tortoise, and it liked to carry heavy load. One of the divine beasts, Chiwen was the 9th son of the dragon. It liked to eat, and it especially liked to swallow fire. It was often engraved on the roof to suppress fire. Yifan took the Taotai scabbards that were floating in front of him with both hands. Buzz! The moment the scabbards entered his hands, they shone brightly, and silver light shot out in all directions. Buzz! At this moment, the Frost Dragon sword that had been coiled around Yifan's waist all this time flew out by itself. It had already sensed the aura of the Taotai. The Frost Dragon was the father, and the Taotai was the son. When father and son met, they were naturally excited. Buzz! After the Frost Dragon sword flew out of Yifan's waist, it shone brightly and flew toward the Taotai scabbards. Buzz! The Taotai scabbards also sensed the aura of the Frost Dragon sword, and it flew toward the Frost Dragon sword. The 2 balls of silver light met in an instant. Clang! Silver light exploded, and propitious chi rose. The Frost Dragon sword and the Taotai scabbards merged into one. After the silver light dispersed, the Frost Dragon sword slowly flew back into Yifan's hands. Yifan looked at the divine weapon in his hands again. The Taotai scabbards were the end of the scabbards, and it had already covered the tip of the Frost Dragon sword. To Yifan's surprise, the silver snake's tail that was coiled around the sword hilt had undergone a huge change. It was no longer a smooth and slender snake's tail. Instead, it had turned into a dragon's tail that was covered in dragon scales and surrounded by auspicious air. Chapter 451. Although the Frost Dragon sword has been forcefully sealed, its intelligence is not affected at all. True Lord Fire Dragon looked at the surprised Yifan and smiled. Now that the Taotai has returned to its body and the father and son have reunited, the Frost Dragon has obtained the power of the Taotai. Naturally, a portion of the seal will be broken. If the 9 scabbards return, the seal on the Frost Dragon sword will be completely broken. At that time, you will truly experience the true power of the Frost Dragon sword. Yifan was overjoyed when he heard True Lord Fire Dragon's words. Although he only had one of the Frost Dragon 9 scabbards, he had heard from his brother Kim that the Frost Dragon 9 scabbards were extremely powerful. Once all 9 scabbards were gathered, their power would not be inferior to the Frost Dragon sword. Now that he had Taotai, his chances of winning would greatly increase if he faced an expert in the future. Although he did not know the power of the Taotai sword scabbards, the fact that the scabbards could unseal the Frost Dragon sword meant that the power of Taotai was not to be underestimated. May I know who asked you to bring this treasure to me? Yifan asked True Lord Fire Dragon. Just now, true monarch fire dragon said that he was entrusted by someone. He was very curious about who that person was. Someone who could ask true Lord Fire Dragon to do this was definitely not an ordinary person. Ha ha, who else could it be? True Lord Fire Dragon laughed. Speaking of which, you know this person too. He is the heavenly dragon that your Yi family has worshipped for generations, Old Bai of the Thunder Tribe. It's the heavenly dragon in white. Yi Fan was enlightened. Old Bai holds an important position in the Thunder Tribe. Recently, he has been dealing with some troublesome matters and has no time to spare. When he found out that I was in the lower realm, he specially asked me to pass this item to you, True Lord Fire Dragon said with a smile. Thank you, True Lord. Yi Fan bowed to True Lord Fire Dragon. When you return to the heavenly court, if you see my benefactor again, please thank him on my behalf. Old Bai told me that you are very courteous. Seeing you today, it seems that you are right, True Lord Fire Dragon said with a smile. Don't worry, I will pass on your message. Yi Fan thanked him again. Old White's task has been completed. It's your turn now, True Monarch Fire Dragon said as he turned his head towards Fire Snake. The smile on his face had disappeared, replaced by a dignified expression. After hearing True Monarch Fire Dragon's words, Fire Snake lowered its head even more. Yi Fan frowned when he heard that. He turned his head to look at the crestfallen Fire Snake beside him, then turned his head to look at True Monarch Fire Dragon, who was imposing without being angry. He silently took a few steps back and did not say a word. Although he didn't know what wrong Fire Snake had done, it was still his family's business, and it wasn't convenient for him to get involved. What? Do you still know your mistake? True Monarch Fire Dragon asked coldly when he saw Fire Snake lowering his head. Hiss! The Fire Snake let out a soft hiss, not daring to raise its head to look at True Lord Fire Dragon. What did I tell you before I ascended? True Monarch Fire Dragon looked coldly at Fire Snake and asked. Fire Snake remained motionless and didn't say a word. I told the two of you to cultivate diligently and protect the people. I told you to accumulate merits and bring benefits to all living things in the hope of returning to the righteous path. What did you do? Did you do it? True Monarch Fire Dragon's voice wasn't loud, but it was dignified. Yi Fan, who was standing to the side, could tell that the two of you True Monarch Fire Dragon was referring to as Fire Snake and his wife. Hiss! Hiss! Fire Snake let out a few soft hiss. That's your reason? True Monarch Fire Dragon asked. Fire Snake once again remained silent. Birth, old age, sickness, and death are part of the cycle of all living things. Although Xian Er was harmed, this is also part of her destiny, True Monarch Fire Dragon said to Fire Snake. You've been stubborn for 15 years, and your love has turned into hatred. You abandoned the lives of the people and still have the nerve to come here and see me. Fire Snake bent his head and lightly touched the ground. He nodded 3 times, as if he was kowtowing to True Monarch Fire Dragon in apology. You swore an oath. If you break your promise, you will be severely punished, True Monarch Fire Dragon said to Fire Snake with a solemn expression. Do you have anything to say today? Fire Snake lowered his head and shook it. Chapter 452. The Fire Snake lowered its head and remained motionless, allowing True Lord Fire Dragon to punish it. True Lord, please wait. Yi Fan could not stand it any longer. Even if the Fire Snake had broken its oath, it should not have received such a heavy punishment. To the Fire Snake, 500 years of cultivation was equivalent to taking away half of its life. As Yi Fan spoke, he used his peerless movement technique, and a shadow instantly appeared in front of the Fire Snake. Smack! Yi Fan blocked with his arms and caught True Lord Fire Dragon's palm that was about to hit the Fire Snake. Boom! A loud sound was heard, and the air waves scattered in all directions. Yi Fan, who was blocking in front of the Fire Snake, only felt an earth-shattering force coming from his arms. before he could use his spiritual energy to resist, his body flew backward like a kite with a broken string. Whoosh! The fire snake behind Yi Fan was instantly hit by Yi Fan's flying figure, and it was also sent flying backward. The two of them were directly blasted out of the main hall by True Lord Fire Dragon's palm. Bang! Bang! The man and the snake instantly crashed into the outer wall of the Fire Dragon Temple, which was 10 feet away, and then slid down the wall to the ground. Two huge cracks appeared on the wall of the temple made of huge stones in an instant. True Lord Fire Dragon's palm made Yi Fan's blood and chi churn in his chest, and he saw stars. As he slowly got up from the ground, he used his spiritual energy to calm the churning blood and chi in his chest. As expected of a true immortal from the upper realm, just a casual palm had such shocking power. The power of a true immortal was indeed powerful. Even with his spiritual energy protecting his body, this was still the case. If this palm had hit the fire snake directly, the fire snake would not have been able to survive for long even if it did not die. Thinking of this, Yi Fan bent down and checked the injuries of the fire snake lying beside him. At this moment, the fire snake was slowly getting up from the ground, constantly shaking its head. Although Yi Fan had taken most of the force of the palm, the impact of Yi Fan's flying body still made it dizzy. After all, its body was only 10 feet long, and when True Lord Fire Dragon's palm hit it, it did not use its spiritual energy to resist. Seeing that the fire snake was not seriously injured, Yi Fan's anxious heart finally calmed down. Whoosh! True Lord Fire Dragon's figure instantly appeared in front of Yi Fan. True Lord Fire Snake, with its hands behind its back, its brows furrowed, as it calmly asked Yi Fan, "Why did you save it?" The appearance of True Monarch Fire Dragon made the fire snake, who had just lifted its head, lower its head again. True Lord, True Lord! Yi Fan fell to his knees in front of True Lord Fire Dragon, cupped his fists, and said with his head lowered, "Although it was wrong, it did not deserve to die. I hope True Lord Fire Dragon will not be angry and spare it this time." "Spare it?" True Lord Fire Dragon said, as it turned its head to look at the fire snake. For 15 years, its love turned into hatred, and it did not care about the people of this area. This led to the birth of evil creatures in this desert, and the people suffered. "How can I spare it?" "True Lord, please don't be angry," Yi Fan pleaded with the True Lord of Fire Dragon. As the saying goes, a Taoist is not a saint. Everyone makes mistakes. 15 years ago, his partner was killed by someone else. His love turned into hatred, and he no longer had any hope for humans. I think it's understandable. I hope that True Lord will spare his life on account of his infatuation and mercy, and not kill him. Let him repent and repent for his sins," Yi Fan said as he turned his head to look at the fire snake beside him. True Lord Fire Dragon frowned and looked straight at Yi Fan, as if he was hesitating. "If True Lord Fire Dragon really can't spare it, then please punish me as well," Yi Fan said when he saw True Lord Fire Dragon hesitate. "Punish you?" True Lord Fire Dragon asked Yi Fan with a frown. "Why should I punish you?" True Lord's eyes are as sharp as lightning. What this disciple has done will definitely not escape True Lord's eyes. Yi Fan said to True Lord Fire Dragon, "Although Brother Fire Snake has broken his oath, he has not done anything that offends the heavens and reason. This disciple has killed more than 100 people and has a heavy sin. Based on this disciple's sin is much greater than Brother Fire Snake's. Since Brother Fire Snake deserves to be punished, this disciple deserves to die. True Lord, am I right?" This True Lord Fire Dragon was at a loss for words after hearing Yi Fan's words. What Yi Fan said was right. Although Fire Serpent's love for humans had turned into hatred, he had never committed any crimes of murder. Yi Fan, on the other hand, was different. During the battle at the Zhou residence alone, he had killed as many as 300 people. "Please punish me, True Lord," Yi Fan said as he lowered his head and offered the Frost Dragon's sword with both hands. Fire Snake was kind-hearted and did not deserve to die. He had to save him no matter what. True Lord Fire Dragon looked at the white-haired young man in front of him. His sleeves were stained with blood, and he did not speak for a long time. Although this young man was the reincarnation of Eldritch, he was someone who valued friendship and justice. He could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. He already knew what Yi Fan had done to Fire Snake. Returning the inner core, healing the wound, stabbing the arm and asking for forgiveness. This young man had done everything he could. Not only that, when he was punishing Fire Snake, this young man, who had nothing to do with Fire Snake, stepped forward bravely and saved him with his own life. Such a righteous act was rare and commendable. No wonder the Thunder Sect's white-robed heavenly dragon favored this kid so much. This kid was indeed not ordinary. Forget it, forget it. After a long time, True Lord Fire Dragon waved his sleeves and said to Yi Fan, "Get up." That Fire Snake. Yi Fan, who was kneeling on the ground, raised his head and looked at True Lord Fire Dragon. "I'll spare him this time." "Get up," True Lord Fire Dragon said to Yi Fan. "Thank you, True Lord." Yi Fan stood up excitedly. "Today, on account of Eldritch pleading for you, I'll remember your punishment and spare you this time." True Lord Fire Dragon turned his head and said to Fire Snake, "If there's a next time, I'll remove the dragon pearl on your head and turn you into an ordinary snake." Hiss! Seeing that True Lord Fire Dragon had forgiven him, the Fire Snake immediately kowtowed to True Lord Fire Dragon. "He's your savior. Why aren't you thanking him?" True Lord Fire Dragon reminded the Fire Snake. The Fire Snake kowtowed to Yi Fan again. If it wasn't for Yi Fan's help, its 1,000 years of cultivation would have been destroyed in an instant. It might have even lost its life. Seeing the Fire Snake bow to him, Yi Fan quickly returned the bow. Chapter 453. 2 hours later. Fire Dragon Town, a small tavern. At the entrance of the tavern, Akatsuki, who was dressed in red, anxiously stood at the entrance, anxiously pacing back and forth. Baihu, on the other hand, was using its front paws to hold onto the window, staring out with its pair of clear and bright eyes. It was already late at night, but the woman and the fox were not sleepy at all. They were both waiting for a person, a man they both deeply worried about, Yi Fan. Before Yi Fan left, he had said that he would be back in 2 hours at most. But now, a full 2 hours had passed, and Yi Fan still had not returned. Their intuition told them that something must have happened to Yi Fan. They knew about Yi Fan's peerless movement skill. Not to mention the desert, which was more than 500 miles away, even the East Sea, which was thousands of miles away, would not take more than 2 hours. At this time, Akatsuki was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. She now regretted that she did not go with Yi Fan. Although she did not know why Yi Fan wanted to go to the desert so late at night, she had a hunch in her heart that Yi Fan's trip should be related to the Fire Snake. He went to find the Fire Snake in the middle of the night, most likely to go to the Fire Snake to offer a humble apology. Although she and Yi Fan had not been together for a long time, she was well aware of Yi Fan's character. He abhorred evil as if it were his enemy, had a kind heart, valued friendship and righteousness, and was unruly and unruly. He was refined and courteous, but cruel and merciless. Sometimes he was as passionate as fire, and sometimes he was as cold as ice. These seemingly contradictory characters were vividly displayed in this man. It was obvious that the middle-aged couple's words today had completely overturned Yi Fan's deduction of the Fire Snake. With his personality, he would definitely pay back the misunderstanding and harm he had done to the Fire Snake. Akatsuki was not worried that the Fire Snake would harm Yi Fan. The reason was simple. When the Fire Snake fought with Yi Fan, it did not take the initiative to attack Yi Fan, let alone when Yi Fan came to ask for forgiveness. She was worried that Yi Fan would do something stupid. In other words, she was worried that Yi Fan would hurt her. At this moment, She wished she could grow a pair of wings and fly to Yi Fan's side in an instant to see what had happened to her beloved man. But she had no way to leave, nor could she leave. Before Yi Fan left, he had specifically instructed her to stay here and protect the middle-aged couple. It was a matter of life and death. She could not afford to be careless. Since she had promised Yi Fan to stay here and protect him, she had to fulfill her duty. But then again, even if she could leave this place, she might not be able to find Yi Fan. With her movement technique, it would take her at least 3 hours to get to the center of the desert from here. And this was under the condition that she used all her strength to move. Yi Fan's movement technique was very high. He came and went like the wind. He could appear anywhere in the desert in an instant. As for herself, she could not determine Yi Fan's exact location. This desert was thousands of miles wide. Where could she go to find Yi Fan? She had strength but could not use it. Akatsuki became more and more anxious as she thought about it. Her pair of beautiful eyes wrinkled together. Could Yi Fan have encountered some trouble on the way? Could he have encountered that evil creature? Could he be in danger? Could he not be a match for that evil creature? Akatsuki began to let her imagination run wild. Humans were all like this. When they didn't know the outcome of the situation, they would think the worst and not the best. Whoosh! Just as Akatsuki was panicking, a familiar sound broke through the air and entered Akatsuki's ears. Whoosh! After a while, a strong gust of wind followed. Whoosh! The strong wind stirred up yellow sand that hit the windows and made a rustling sound. The appearance of these two voices made Yu Hongji, who was extremely anxious, happy. She could not be more familiar with these two sounds. They were the sounds of Yi Fan's return. Yi Fan's movement technique was very fast. The effect of his peerless movement technique was completely different from that of an ordinary expert. When an ordinary expert used their movement technique, they would at most create a gust of wind. Moreover, the sound of the movement technique and the gust of wind were produced at almost the same time. It was difficult to distinguish. However, Yi Fan's movement technique was not that simple. His movement technique was as fast as lightning. Compared to his movement technique, the gust of wind was not even worth mentioning. When Yi Fan carried Akatsuki back to the warship, he had easily pierced through the clouds and chased after lightning. That scene was something that Akatsuki would never forget for the rest of her life. When the movement technique's speed far exceeded the gust of wind, a phenomenon would appear. First, the sound of the movement technique breaking through the air would be heard. Then, the gust of wind created by the movement technique would appear. The faster the movement technique, the longer the interval between these two sounds would be. However, Yi Fan's movement technique was too fast. The gust of wind created was not as simple as that. The strength of the wind was comparable to that of a gust of wind. Back when Fujiwara no Chiko was afflicted with the soul-dissolving technique, Yi Fan, in order to save his beloved wife, cultivated a peerless secret technique and rushed to the Zhou residence alone to save his beloved wife. The gust of wind created by his movement technique directly overturned the entire wedding banquet. However, at that time, Yi Fan's cultivation was only at the first stage of the mysterious sky secret technique. Now, Yi Fan's cultivation was at the second stage of the mysterious sky secret technique. It was 10 times stronger than the first stage. Chapter 454. When the strong wind dissipated, Baihu, who had been clinging to the window, immediately had her eyes lit up. The person standing outside the door was none other than Yi Fan. In fact, the movement just now was deliberately made by Yi Fan. On the way back from the Fire Dragon Temple, he did not use the cloud riding technique. There were 2 reasons. First, when he left, he promised that he would come back in 2 hours. Now, 4 hours had passed. He did not even need to guess. Akatsuki and Xiao Zhao must be anxiously waiting for him. He must come back as soon as possible. Second, now was a special time. The people of Fire Dragon Town were all in a state of panic. The two evil beings had been cultivating for many years and were good at transformation. If they came to knock on the door with their own appearance, with Akatsuki's cultivation, she might not be able to distinguish them in time. Even if his spiritual barrier could temporarily protect them, who could guarantee that the evil beings would not be like Inchan Dashyong, who could feed on spiritual power? Although the probability of these two things happening was very small, Yi Fan had to be careful. At that time, Zhou Quan disguised himself as his father to sneak attack him, causing his beloved wife to be affected by the soul-dissolving technique and become strangers to him. Inchan Dashyong, who could suck spiritual power, plotted against him behind his back. In the end, the three souls of his beloved wife were still in Matsumoto Takeyoshi's soul-gathering evil cauldron. These two things forced Yi Fan to develop the good habit of being meticulous and doing things like Zhou Quan. There was one thing that Akatsuki was still in the dark. In order to ensure their safety, Yi Fan had secretly hidden the Everfire sword under the table in the wine hall. When he left, he used the wide white robe he wore as a cover and pressed the Everfire sword under the table. In this way, even if the evil beings took advantage of his absence to sneak attack here and break the spiritual barrier he set up, with the power of the Everfire sword, the evil beings would not be able to take advantage of it. As the saying goes, even immortals are afraid of a puff of smoke, let alone demons. In order to allow Akatsuki to recognize his identity, and in order to rush back here as soon as possible, Yi Fan used his spiritual power to push his movement technique to the extreme. Akatsuki was very clear about her own body movements. That evil creature might be able to imitate her appearance, but it would not be able to imitate her body movements. Yi Fan was very confident in his own movement technique. From the Pear Blossom Palace in Miaojiang to the northernmost glacier, which was thousands of miles away, it only took him 2 hours. Other than the true immortals of the upper realm, if he claimed to be the second, no one would dare to claim to be the first. After landing, Yi Fan slowly walked to the entrance of the tavern. Knock, knock, knock. Yi Fan gently knocked on the door a few times. Before knocking on the door, he had already used his super strong 5 senses to instantly investigate everything in the room. He wanted to allow Akatsuki to recognize him, and at the same time, he wanted to verify if the people in the tavern were really Akatsuki and the rest. The reason was very simple: the evil creature could transform into his appearance, but it could also transform into their appearance. He had to be very careful, and he could not make a single mistake. After a round of investigation, Yi Fan's heart was at ease. The fragrance on Akatsuki's body, the spiritual power on Baihu Xiao Zhao's body, and the fire energy emitted by the departing fire sword embedded under the table were all sensed by Yi Fan one by one. It seemed that everything was the same as when he left, except for Akatsuki and Xiao Zhao. Their heartbeats were obviously much faster than when he had just left. Yi Fan could feel that they were very worried about his safety. Creak. Just as Yi Fan finished knocking on the door, the wooden door of the tavern instantly opened from the inside. Akatsuki, dressed in a red robe, stood in front of the door, looking straight at Yi Fan with a pair of beautiful eyes. Her eyes were filled with resentment, but also full of tenderness. At this moment, she really wanted to rush over and protect Yi Fan, because she was too worried about Yi Fan. Yi Fan had only been gone for 4 hours, but to her, these 4 hours were like 2 years. However, in the end, she did not summon up the courage. She was afraid that if she did this, they might not even be able to be partners. "I'm sorry, I came back late and made you worry." Yi Fan knew that Akatsuki was worried about him, and he did not come back at the agreed time, so he immediately apologized to Akatsuki. According to Japanese etiquette, it was very impolite to miss an appointment, so Yi Fan apologizing to Akatsuki was understandable. Zing. Seeing that Yi Fan had returned safely, Baihu jumped up from the windowsill and directly into Yi Fan's arms. Patter, patter. Baihu stuck out her pink tongue and intimately licked Yifan's cheek. Although she was now Baihu and could not speak, she was more worried about Yifan's late return than anyone else. Okay. Yifan smiled as he dodged Baihu's tongue. Aren't I back now? Why are you only back now? Akatsuki suppressed the impulse in her heart, pretending to be calm as she pulled Yifan, who was standing at the door, into the room. Chapter 455. You're injured. Akatsuki looked at the blood on her hand and then looked at Yifan's right arm that was soaked in blood. She immediately cried out in alarm. Earlier, she had been immersed in the joy of Yifan's safe return, so she had not noticed the abnormality of Yifan's white robe. Yifan's white robe was stained red and there were 2 symmetrical cuts that were very eye-catching. Akatsuki, who was familiar with all kinds of weapons, could tell with a glance that the 2 cuts on Yifan's left arm were caused by a long sword. Furthermore, it was Yifan's snake shadow sword. The reason was very simple. The blood on his sleeve had not dried yet, but the blood around the cut had already frozen into ice. The thing that she was most worried about had happened. In order to ask for forgiveness from the fire snake, Yifan had used the snake's shadow sword to stab his left arm through the bone. Only like this could he be at ease. You fool! Akatsuki looked at the blood-soaked sleeve. Her pair of beautiful eyes flashed with tears and her voice began to choke with sobs. She would rather stab herself with the sword than let Yifan get hurt in the slightest. Once she thought of the scene of Yifan stabbing his left arm with the snake's shadow sword, Akatsuki's heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. She grabbed Yifan's arm and pulled him into the room. Then she forcefully pressed Yifan into a chair. You don't have to worry. I'm fine. Yifan, who was wearing the white jade mask, said to Akatsuki. Akatsuki did not say anything. She turned around and quickly walked to the kitchen to get some hot water. The moment she turned around, tears fell from Akatsuki's eyes. Yifan's sword did not stab her left arm, but her heart. At this moment, she finally understood why Yifan did not bring her and Xiao Zhao. If the 2 of them had followed him, Yifan wouldn't have hurt him at all. As for Yifan asking him to stay here to protect the safety of this place, that was just an excuse. Woo! Inside the restaurant, Baihu, who was standing on Yifan's lap, looked up at Yifan with a pained expression. Silly girl. Yifan stretched out his right hand and stroked Baihu's head. He smiled and said, Aren't I fine? Take off your clothes. Akatsuki came to Yifan with a basin of hot water. She placed the basin on the table and said coldly to Yifan, Take off my clothes? Akatsuki's words stunned Yifan. Take off your clothes now. Akatsuki, whose eyes were red, shouted at Yifan. I'm fine, you don't have to, you're not going to take it off, right? Akatsuki interrupted Yifan's explanation. As she spoke, she walked quickly to Yifan and reached out to take off his clothes for Yifan. No. You are. Yifan's face turned red from Akatsuki's sudden actions. What are you doing? Yifan said as he stood up from his seat. Sit down. Akatsuki said loudly as she pressed Yifan back into the chair. Her tone was completely commanding. Yifan didn't say anything and let Akatsuki take off his clothes. He knew that Akatsuki was angry. Ever since they became partners, this was the first time he saw Akatsuki angry. Listen to me, I'm really fine. Yifan wanted to explain to her. Fine? You're bleeding so much and you're still saying you're fine? Akatsuki quickly took off Yifan's clothes while staring at Yifan's eyes with her beautiful red eyes. Yifan was completely speechless. In the blink of an eye, Yifan's clothes were completely stripped off by Akatsuki. It was really the cycle of the heavens and karma. The naked Yifan couldn't help but shake his head with a bitter smile. When he had ordered clothes for Akatsuki, he had used this kind of commanding tone to make Akatsuki take off her clothes. Now retribution had come. His clothes had been taken off, and his upper body was completely stripped off. Next time, don't stab your arm. Stab your heart directly. That would be much better, Akatsuki said coldly to Yifan as she soaked her handkerchief in a copper basin. Yifan's heart skipped a beat. Akatsuki had actually guessed the truth. Then wouldn't I be dead? Yifan said to Akatsuki with a smile. He knew that Akatsuki was speaking in a fit of anger. Akatsuki glared at Yifan. Then she used the wet handkerchief to wipe off the blood on Yifan's left arm. At this time, Yifan's left arm was blood-red. It was covered in blood and the wound was covered in clot. It was a shocking sight. When Akatsuki carefully wiped away the blood clots that had already formed on Yifan's wound, she was shocked to find that the wound on Yifan's left arm had almost completely healed. The 3-inch-long wound had already turned into a line of blood. This made Akatsuki feel very surprised and puzzled. It was clear that this wound had been healed, and it wasn't done by Yifan. The reason was very simple. There was still a trace of fire aura left on the wound. And this aura was exactly the same as the aura emitted by the fire snake in the desert. I told you it was fine. You didn't believe me. Seeing Akatsuki in a daze, Yifan said with a smile. Was it the fire snake that stopped your bleeding? Akatsuki asked. Chapter 456. It seems like nothing can be hidden from this exceptionally intelligent woman. Akatsuki did not speak, as she silently dipped a handkerchief in hot water and wiped Yifan's bloody arm. When Akatsuki's soft and boneless hands touched Yifan's bare arm, Yifan under the mask immediately wrinkled his brow, and his arm instinctively trembled. Although he had hugged Akatsuki's waist, and had also let Akatsuki pull his arm, but that was a critical moment, and there was a reason for it, and the two of them were separated by clothes. Now his upper body was naked, and Akatsuki was holding his arm with one hand, while the other hand was using a handkerchief dipped in hot water to wipe his body. This scene made him think of his wife, Fujiwara no Chiko. After the big wedding, every time Yifan took a bath, Fujiwara no Chiko would personally wipe his body, and the scene in front of him was very similar to the scene in front of him. Thinking of the endless spring scenery at that time, Yifan suddenly began to feel his mouth and tongue dry. Although his cultivation was high, but after all, he was still a normal man. Being in contact with Akatsuki's skin made him feel a fire burning in his heart. I'll do it myself. Yifan took a deep breath, and pretended to be calm as he said to Akatsuki. You are injured, and you have lost so much blood, let me do it. Akatsuki said without raising her head, while her hands continued to wipe Yifan's body. Just a moment ago, she had already seen Yifan's arm tremble, and although she was inexperienced, but she also understood the reason. It was not only Yifan who had a reaction, Akatsuki's heart was also beating faster. At this time, her face was no different from the color of the crystal mask. When she heard that Yifan wanted her to wipe it herself, she instinctively rejected him without even thinking about it. The reason why she didn't look up at Yifan was because she was afraid that Yifan would see the passion in her eyes. Hearing Akatsuki's words, Yifan was helpless. He could only suppress the lust in his heart and allow Akatsuki to gently rub his arm. For some reason, he felt that Akatsuki's hands were getting hotter and hotter, even hotter than the hot water on her handkerchief. He really wanted to extract the cold energy from the snake's shadow sword at his waist or the ice core in his body to calm his lust, but he couldn't do that. Although Akatsuki's cultivation was not as high as his, but she was still a chi circulating expert. She was now tightly holding his arm, and the meridians were on his arm. If he used the cold energy, Akatsuki would definitely know. With her intelligence, she would definitely see through his intentions. At that time, wouldn't he be exposing himself? He also thought of directly pulling his arm back from Akatsuki's hands, but he couldn't do that. After all, she was treating his wound because she cared about him. If he really did that, wouldn't he be letting down her good intentions and be too rude? At this time, Yi Fan's heart was in torment and pain. He could go anywhere, but he couldn't resolve the awkward situation in front of him. The two of them were silent, each thinking about their own matters. Finally, after the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the remaining blood on Yi Fan's arm was completely wiped clean by Akatsuki. The two of them let out a long sigh. After wiping, Akatsuki took out a white handkerchief and carefully bandaged Yi Fan's wound. She even tied a beautiful knot. "Wear my white robe for the time being." As Akatsuki spoke, she took off her white robe and handed it to Yi Fan. "Wear your clothes after I wash and repair them." This time, Akatsuki wore two sets of clothes. She wore the red robe inside and the white robe outside. After all, they were in the clouds and the cold wind was bone-piercing. She had to wear more clothes. "Sorry to trouble you," Yi Fan said as he took the white robe from Akatsuki and put it on. Akatsuki was tall and the Japanese white robe was unusually wide. After putting it on, Yi Fan didn't feel any sense of restraint. His chest muscles were bare and his collar was loose. He looked rough and heroic. At first glance, he didn't look any different from a Japanese. Akatsuki looked at Yi Fan, who was wearing her white robe, and felt a little gratified. Ever since she partnered with Yi Fan, it had always been Yi Fan taking care of her. Now, she could also take care of Yi Fan. She liked this feeling very much. After tidying everything up, Akatsuki poured a cup of tea for Yi Fan and sat down opposite Yi Fan. Baihu lay quietly in Yi Fan's arms, motionless. "Why were you gone for so long this time? What happened?" Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. She had a feeling that Yi Fan didn't just go out to apologize. Something else must have happened. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken so long to come back. "Do you know what the pair of evil creatures that came to Fire Dragon Town to ask for the boy and girl are?" Yi Fan said as he took off his white jade mask, picked up his teacup and took a sip. At this time, the middle-aged couple was already sleeping soundly next door. Yi Fan wasn't worried that they would see his true face. "Why? Do you know the origin of that evil creature?" Akatsuki asked. Chapter 457. 100-Bone Skeleton? It was the first time that Akatsuki had heard of this name. For thousands of years, countless people and animals have died in this desert. The accumulated resentment has led to the rampant ghosts and monsters here. Yi Fan said to Akatsuki, "That 100-bone skeleton is one of them." "100-bone skeleton, is it a ghost?" Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. "It's not as simple as a ghost," Yi Fan said with a solemn face. "The original form of this 100-bone skeleton was originally a skeleton in the desert. Because its resentment was not extinguished when it was dying, its ghost did not disperse. It was lonely and had no one to rely on, so it could only linger on the corpse. After a long time, its resentment and soul merged with the skeleton, and it gained intelligence." "You mean, this evil thing is a skeleton possessed by a ghost?" Akatsuki asked. "You're thinking too simply," Yi Fan said as he looked at Akatsuki. "If that's the case, the Taoist priest in Fire Dragon Town who returned to the secular world would have already subdued it. How could it have died tragically in the hands of this evil thing?" "Then what's going on?" Akatsuki asked Yi Fan in confusion. After the resentment soul merged with the skeleton, it was just the beginning, Yi Fan continued. After this thing gained intelligence, it would continuously absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, as well as the essence of the sun and the moon. Although this desert is uninhabited with thousands of miles of yellow sand, for this evil thing, it's simply an excellent place for cultivation. "An excellent place for cultivation? You mean this desert?" Akatsuki's words were filled with surprise. This was the first time she had heard of this. As far as she knew, cultivators would usually choose to cultivate in a secluded environment deep in the mountains and forests where spiritual energy lingered. She had never heard of anyone who would choose a deserted desert filled with yellow sand as a place to cultivate. You mustn't underestimate this desert, Yi Fan explained to Akatsuki. During the day, the yang-chi here is blazing and unbearably hot. At night, the yin-chi is pure and as cold as water. As for that evil creature, it has yin soul and yang bone. It's not an ordinary monster, and the desert's environment provides it with the best place to cultivate. No wonder they call themselves the desert god. Akatsuki suddenly realized. This evil creature is completely different from ordinary demons, Yi Fan continued. If ordinary demons want to become powerful, they need to cultivate for hundreds of years before they can take human form, remove the hyoid bone in their mouth, and speak human language. And this evil creature itself is transformed from a human, so its intelligence is naturally much higher than other demons. In this way, it can take less than 3 years of cultivation to take human form and harm people everywhere. They usually appear at night and turn into handsome men and beautiful women to seduce and confuse passing merchants. They take the opportunity to absorb their flesh and primordial spirit in order to enhance their own cultivation and try to cultivate into a bone immortal. Bone immortal? Akatsuki frowned after hearing this. These 2 words made people feel uncomfortable. That's right, bone immortal. Yi Fan frowned and said, every time this evil creature absorbs a person's flesh and primordial spirit, its own cultivation will increase by a little. When the number of people whose flesh and primordial spirit has been absorbed reaches 100, one of the original white bones will directly turn into a demon bone. When the 100 white bones in the body completely turn into demon bones, it will cultivate into a bone demon, also known as a 100-bone skeleton. If this 100-bone skeleton wants to continue to cultivate into a bone immortal, it must continue to harm people. However, the flesh and primordial spirit needed to cultivate into a bone immortal is no longer the flesh and primordial spirit of ordinary humans, but must be children under the age of 7. Every year, it will devour 5 pairs of children. After 100 years, it will become a bone immortal. Once it becomes a bone immortal, even the immortals from the upper realm can't do anything to it. Could it be that the pair of evil creatures that asked for children from the people of Fire Dragon Town has already cultivated into a 100-bone skeleton? Akatsuki asked in surprise after hearing Yi Fan's words. According to Yi Fan's words, the pair of 100-bone skeletons had killed at least thousands of people. Yi Fan nodded with a solemn face. Could it be that the 100-bone skeletons we saw in the desert were? Yi Fan's words suddenly reminded Akatsuki of the caravan that had died tragically. It was done by the 100-bone skeleton, Yi Fan said with a frown. There were babies in the caravan, so they naturally wouldn't let them go. Unforgivable, Akatsuki said with gritted teeth. There are 2 more days until the deadline given by that evil creature, Yi Fan said calmly and looked at Akatsuki. Before that, I have a very important thing that I need your help with. What's the important thing? Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. What do you need me to do? At dawn tomorrow, bring shopkeeper Du and his wife, and bring all the residents of Fire Dragon Town safely to the Fire Dragon Temple that is 15 kilometers away from here, Yi Fan said. Chapter 458. To tell you the truth, the 100 skeletons were husband and wife when they were alive. After they died, they cultivated in the desert for more than 800 years. The man calls himself Lord Whitebone while the woman calls herself Lady Whitebone. Both of them have reached the bone demon realm and their cultivation is unfathomable, Yi Fan told Yu Hongji. If the people stay here, I won't have the time to fight them. Your mission is to take the people of the town to the Fire Dragon Temple. The Fire Dragon deity is worshipped there. No matter how bold the 100 skeletons are, they won't dare to cause trouble there. Whitebone gentleman. Madam Whitebone? Akatsuki looked at Yi Fan with her beautiful eyes and asked curiously, why do you suddenly know so much about this matter? Since Akatsuki asked this, Yi Fan didn't hide anything and told Akatsuki everything that happened in the Fire Dragon Temple. The Fire Dragon True Lord was the one who told him about the 100 skeletons. Yi Fan didn't mention anything about the Taotai scabbard and the Divine Cauldron. After all, these were his secrets and had nothing to do with this matter. Fire Dragon True Lord? You saw Fire Dragon True Lord? Akatsuki was surprised by Fire Dragon True Lord's appearance. She didn't expect Yi Fan to see the legendary immortal. True Lord told me that the 100 skeletons will come to town the day after tomorrow to take the 10 pairs of children, Yi Fan said to Akatsuki. So before sunset the day after tomorrow, you have to bring more than 500 families and more than 2,000 people to the Fire Dragon Temple safely. As for the White Bone couple, let me and Fire Snake deal with them. I'll help you, Akatsuki said to Yi Fan. Although she knew that her cultivation wasn't as good as Yi Fan's, she was still an expert. The more people, the better. Yi Fan shook his head. Didn't you say that the Fire Dragon Temple is very safe? Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. Since true Monarch Fire Dragon is guarding that place, I can help you. The Fire Dragon Temple is indeed very safe, but that doesn't mean that there's no need to watch over it, Yi Fan said to Akatsuki. There are at least 2,000 people in the Fire Dragon Town. Someone must watch over them and maintain order there. Perfected Lord Fire Dragon was a perfected immortal from the upper realm. You can't expect him to appear and watch over them, right? Besides, you still have to take care of Xiao Zhao. With her with you, I can face the enemy with peace of mind. Woo! Baihu, who was in Yi Fan's arms, looked up at Yi Fan unwillingly. Yi Fan smiled and patted Baihu's head from behind. Then, all right. Akatsuki saw that Yi Fan's words were reasonable and could only agree. Remember, your responsibility is to protect the local people. No matter what happens at night the day after tomorrow, you can't leave on your own. Do you understand? Yi Fan reminded Akatsuki. What about you? Where are you going tomorrow? Akatsuki asked Yi Fan. I'll secretly protect you in the clouds tomorrow, Yi Fan said. The White Bone couple has reached the Bone Demon realm. They have many changes. If they change into the appearance of the local people and blend into the crowd, it'll be hard to guard against them. Akatsuki seemed to have woken up from a dream and suddenly understood. Yi Fan was right. If the evil couple really changed into the appearance of a normal person and blended into the crowd, then used evil magic to torture the people, the consequences would be unimaginable. After all, the caravan in the desert had its flesh, blood, and primordial spirit taken away in an instant. Yi Fan was really too considerate. It's late now. You still have a lot of things to do tomorrow. Rest. Yi Fan said. Akatsuki nodded in response. Yi Fan stood up from his seat and went directly to the bed that the tavern couple had pieced together for them using a wooden table. He lay down with his clothes on. The red-faced Akatsuki blew out the candle and went directly to the other side of the bed, slowly lying down. The two of them stood on the left and right. Baihu, who was lying in the middle, completely separated the two of them. The night was silent. In the middle of the night, Yi Fan, who was lying on the bed, heard the sound of Akatsuki getting out of bed. Although Akatsuki tried her best to be quiet, Yi Fan still heard it clearly. Yi Fan pretended to close his eyes and sleep, pretending that he didn't know anything. There was a difference between men and women. Akatsuki must have woken up at this time to relieve herself. However, after a series of rustling sounds, the sound of washing clothes came from the kitchen in the distance. She was washing his bloody clothes. Yi Fan, who was lying on the bed pretending to sleep, slowly opened his eyes. He saw Akatsuki's concern for him, and remembered it in his heart. When Akatsuki discovered that her left arm was injured, she cried. Although Akatsuki tried her best to hide it, it was still discovered by the attentive Yi Fan. A woman crying for a man. No matter how stupid Yi Fan was, he could understand the meaning behind it. When she wiped the blood on his arm, Yi Fan not only felt Akatsuki's hand getting hotter and hotter, but he also heard her heartbeat getting faster and faster. All signs indicated that this woman had fallen for him. However, the falling flowers willingly followed the flowing water, but the flowing water had no intention of loving the falling flowers. Other than Fujiwara no Chiko, he would not fall in love with another woman. Whether it was the Yi family's daughter, Yi Feishue, who had saved his life, or Akatsuki, who was from a famous sect and treated him meticulously, or even Baihu Xiaozhao, who saved him with her life, in his heart, no woman could replace Fujiwara no Chiko's position. Chapter 459. 2 days later. Fire Dragon Town. Night. In Yikong, Mingyu hung high in the vast sea of stars. Under the moonlight, Yi Fan, who was wearing a white robe and a mask, stood there quietly with his hands behind his back. He raised his head and looked at the bright Mingyu in Yikong. Beside him, Fire Snake, who was possessed by red scales and had a dragon ball on its head, was sitting there, staring straight at the entrance of Fire Dragon Town. At this time, Fire Snake had shrunk its body from 1,000 feet to 100 feet. After all, it was now in the center of Fire Dragon Town. If it didn't shrink its body, the roads of Fire Dragon Town wouldn't be able to accommodate its huge dragon-like body. On its forehead, in addition to the dragon ball the size of a fist, Fire Snake's inner core that Yi Fan returned to him was also floating. The inner core was the size of a walnut and slowly circled around the dragon ball. If you fight later, try not to use it in the town. Think of a way to lure them into the desert. Yi Fan turned his head and said to Fire Snake, "There are no residential houses there, so you can fight freely." Hiss! Fire Snake nodded at Yi Fan. The White Bone couple has a high level of cultivation, Yi Fan continued to say to Fire Snake. When the two sides fight, they will definitely divide and conquer. If I'm not by your side, you have to be more careful. If you see that the situation is not good, leave first. Don't act rashly. Hiss! Fire Snake hissed softly, but it was unknown whether it agreed or disagreed. Yi Fan's words had a deeper meaning. Fire Snake was originally a pair. Now that the female snake was no longer in this world, the male snake naturally had no worries. He was worried that in the fierce battle later, Fire Snake would disregard everything and fight with his life. He had lost his wife, so he naturally understood how Fire Snake felt at this time. When he lost his wife, the first thing he thought of was to take revenge. The second thing he thought of was to follow his wife after taking revenge. Fire Snake's current situation was almost the same as his back then. Rather than saying that his heart was as still as water, it would be more accurate to say that he was completely disheartened. Under such circumstances, it didn't matter to Fire Snake whether he lived or died. The female snake was already dead. If anything were to happen to the Fire Snake, the spirit seed would disappear from this world. Come to think of it, he was indebted to true Lord Fire Dragon. It was reasonable for him to protect his descendants. He couldn't let anything happen to Fire Snake, be it for public or private reasons. At this thought, Yi Fan turned to look at Fire Snake. Fire Snake's eyes were calm, as if he was thinking about something. "Are you thinking about your wife?" Yi Fan asked Fire Snake. Fire Snake turned his head and glanced at Yi Fan, but didn't say anything. "I'll tell you the truth. Although your wife is no longer alive, it's not impossible to bring her back to life," Yi Fan said calmly to Fire Snake. Hiss! Fire Snake immediately turned his head after hearing Yi Fan's words. His eyes were filled with shock. "Brother Snake, to be honest, my experience is similar to yours. My wife's soul is also incomplete, and we don't know whether she's dead or alive. I came here from thousands of miles away in order to find an ancient secret technique to save my wife," Yi Fan said to Fire Snake. "This ancient secret technique is extremely exquisite and unparalleled in the world. It contains the technique to return the soul to the body, as well as the method to recreate flesh and blood. If you can obtain this technique, Your wife will be able to be reborn and return to life. Yi Fan's words could be said to be half true and half true. He didn't say that he was looking for the 9 cauldrons, nor did he reveal the secrets of the 9 cauldrons to Fire Snake. He only said that he was looking for a secret technique. The secret technique recorded in the 9 cauldrons could indeed return the soul to the body, but he didn't know whether it could recreate flesh and blood and be reborn. Since Fire Snake was disheartened by the loss of his wife, then he would give him a chance to live. Whether or not the 9 cauldrons secret technique contained such a secret technique, at least Fire Snake would have some hope and the courage to live. Return the soul to the body, recreate flesh and blood. Be reborn from the body, return to life. Yi Fan's words caused Fire Snake's eyes to light up, even though his heart was already dead. If what this person said was true, then wouldn't his wife have a chance to be reborn? However, in just a moment, Fire Snake's eyes dimmed again. He shook his head and slowly turned his head away. How could there be such a secret technique in the world? If there really was such a mysterious technique, true Lord Fire Dragon would have told him long ago. One must know that true Lord Fire Dragon was a true immortal of the Heaven Realm and his ancestor. There was no reason for him not to help him. What? You don't believe me? Yi Fan saw Fire Snake shake his head and guessed what Fire Snake was thinking. Fire Snake didn't say anything. Not everything can be helped by immortals, Yi Fan said to Fire Snake. If they can help, then how could your wife die? How could my wife's soul be incomplete? You should know better than me how strict the rules of the Heaven Realm are. He told the Fire Serpent what Qing Chenzi had told him. Chapter 460. This young man's words were not without reason. From what true monarch Fire Dragon had said to this young man, there was also an immortal with the surname Bai in the heavenly realm. His relationship with this young man was definitely not ordinary. Otherwise, he would not have given the Tout Eye scabbard to him. Could it be that the secret technique this young man was talking about was true? Fire Snake stared at Yi Fan with its fiery eyes. It did not know if Yi Fan was telling the truth. You've stayed in the desert for so many years. I'm sure you know. Yi Fan looked at the Fire Serpent and said, There's a treasure in the desert. I've come here for it. Without it, I will not be able to obtain the secret technique. Before coming here, Onijiro had told him that Fire Snake seemed to be guarding something. If that was the case, then this Fire Snake would definitely know the exact location of the Divine Cauldron. As Yi Fan said this, his eyes were fixed on Fire Snake. He wanted to see how Fire Snake would react. Whoosh! Just as Yi Fan was observing the reaction of the Fire Serpent, a violent gust of wind mixed with the yellow sand that filled the sky instantly rose from the desert in the distance, forming a huge sand wall that was more than a dozen miles wide and several hundred feet tall. It whistled as if it was covering the sky and covering the earth as it rushed towards them. Its momentum was so strong that the wind and clouds changed color. It's coming! Yi Fan and Fire Snake immediately went into battle mode. Whoosh! The sand wall became faster and faster under the urging of the gust of wind. Wherever it passed, the yellow sand would roll back and soar into the sky. This evil creature wanted to use this powerful sand wall to uproot Fire Dragon Town and completely destroy it. What a ruthless move! Let's go! Yi Fan said to Fire Snake. He activated his movement skill and his figure flashed. Whoosh! Yi Fan's figure instantly disappeared and reappeared at the entrance of Fire Dragon Town. Yi Fan's movement skill did not surprise Fire Snake. After all, they had already fought before. Ting! Yi Fan's movement technique was fast, but the Fire Snake's movement technique was not slow either. The moment Yi Fan disappeared, the Fire Snake did not show any weakness. It urged the Reiki of the Dragon Ball, and a burst of raging flames suddenly rose around its body, and then disappeared in an instant. Bang! Fire Snake reappeared beside Yi Fan as a large ball of flames rose into the air. Just like that, the man and the snake stood at the entrance of Fiery Dragon Town, looking at the crazy sandstorm that was approaching from afar. Whoosh! The speed of the sandstorm was getting faster and faster, and the height of the sand wall was also getting higher and higher. Looking from afar, the sky was still yellow sand. At this moment, the sandstorm was less than 10 miles away from Fiery Dragon Town. A little closer, a little closer. Yifan muttered to himself as he watched the approaching sandstorm. He was looking for the best opportunity to strike back. In the face of such a huge sandstorm wall, his own cold air was of little use. If he wanted to stop such a sandstorm, he could only use his own spirit energy. Using a Reiki wall to fight against the sandstorm wall was Yifan's countermeasure. Setting up a Reiki wall 10 miles away was not a problem for the current Yifan at all. If it was in the past, he would have already made a move. However, he was no longer the young boy he used to be. Countless battles, big and small, had taught him to be careful. Setting up a Reiki wall 10 miles away and setting up a Reiki wall 1 mile away would consume almost 10 times more Reiki. In a fight between experts, what mattered was the result, not showing off or showing off one's skills. Yifan had a deep understanding of this point, and he had also suffered greatly. He had already calculated that when the sandstorm was 300 feet away from him, it would be the best time to make a move. This distance was neither too far nor too close, and he could attack or retreat. After making up his mind, Yifan, who was standing with his hands behind his back, secretly condensed Reiki in his palms, waiting for the right time. Whoosh! The earth-shattering sandstorm wall was less than 5 miles away from them. Whoosh! Before the sandstorm wall arrived, the strong wind arrived first. Whoosh! Yifan's white robe fluttered in the strong wind brought about by the sandstorm, making flapping noises. The strong wind was mixed with a strong smell of rotting corpses. It was not the first time he had smelled this smell of rotting corpses. When he and Akatsuki had first arrived at Fire Dragon Town, the strange wind they encountered at the entrance emitted this smell. 5 miles, 4 miles, the crazy sandstorm was getting closer and closer. Under the white jade mask, Yifan narrowed his eyes and prepared to make a move. However, at this time, the fire snake, which had been entrenched beside Yifan all this time, began to move. It slowly moved in front of Yifan, blocking Yifan behind it. It was very obvious that it wanted to make the first move. The fire snake's action immediately made Yifan frown. It immediately disrupted Yifan's plan. However, Yifan did not say anything about this. After all, they were now working together to deal with the enemy, and there was no agreement on who would make the first move. This situation made Yifan feel a little uncomfortable. He had always been a lone wolf, fighting alone. Even if Akatsuki was by his side, she only obeyed his orders. Now the situation had changed. He and the fire snake were equals, and there was no superior or subordinate relationship. In this situation, he could only adapt to the situation and deal with it as it came. Yifan thought to himself, let's see what the fire snake's plan is first. Buzz! The dragon ball floating above the fire snake's head suddenly lit up, and the fire snake's body began to rapidly grow. Chapter 461. The fire snake had reverted to its true form. Whoosh! The earth-shattering wall of sand was less than 1 kilometer away from them. Whoosh! The fire snake, who had reverted to its true form, raised its gigantic red-scaled tail high in the air and slashed it across the ground. Boom! Yellow sand flew up from all directions, and a shockwave spread in all directions. A gigantic wall of sand that was dozens of meters tall and more than 10 kilometers wide instantly rose from the ground in front of Yifan and whizzed toward the sandstorm in the distance. The fire snake's move caused Yifan's pupils to shrink in an instant. This fire snake was so strong. It only used its tail to slash lightly, and it actually had such tyrannical strength. No wonder this fire snake wanted to block in front of him and make the first move. Whoosh! The two walls of sand moved toward each other with great momentum and astonishing momentum. 1 kilometer, in the blink of an eye, the two walls of sand collided at a distance of 1 kilometer away from Yi Fan and the others. Boom! A huge sound was heard, and the earth shook. Yellow sand filled the sky. Whoosh! The yellow sand that filled the sky began to fall slowly, as if it was raining sand. The fire snake's eyes shone brightly as it prepared for battle, not daring to be careless in the slightest. There was a reason why it had made the first move before Yi Fan. Although it had only fought with Yi Fan for a short time, it was well aware of Yi Fan's strength. If it hadn't sensed the inner core of its wife in Yi Fan's body, it wouldn't have been able to dodge Yi Fan's instantaneous movement technique at all. Yi Fan's spiritual energy was so strong that it was the most powerful expert it had seen in 1,000 years apart from true monarch fire dragon. However, no matter how strong one's spiritual energy was, there would still be a time when it would be exhausted. On the surface, the wall of sand just now seemed like the skeleton wanted to use the sandstorm to completely destroy Fire Dragon Town, but in reality, it had other plans. They wanted to use a technique to exhaust this young man's spiritual energy. As long as this young man's spiritual energy was exhausted and his physical strength was exhausted, the skeleton couple would be able to rest easy. It could be seen that this young man did not fall for the White Bones couple's trick. Otherwise, he would have made a move long ago. It had the advantage of its size, so it could dissolve the sand wall with brute force without the use of spiritual energy. In addition, it wanted to conserve spiritual energy for Yi Fan, so it made the first move. Yi Fan stood quietly behind Fire Snake with his hands clasped behind his back. He activated all 5 of his senses and sensed every movement around him. Although the 100-bone skeleton's sand wall was successfully stopped by Fire Snake, he knew that this was just the beginning. The bone couple was just testing their strength. Sure enough, a mile away, the rolling sand that was falling from the sky slowly stopped in midair. Sand. The large amount of yellow sand floating in the air began to quickly gather in one place, and a huge ball of sand had already formed. The fire snake narrowed its eyes and coiled up its huge body, ready to counterattack at any time. Yi Fan's expression was calm as he calmly looked at the spinning ball of sand in the air. The fire snake was much better at dealing with yellow sand than him. After all, the fire snake had lived in this desert for thousands of years and was very familiar with the yellow sand here. What he needed to do now was to deal with all changes by remaining unchanged and sensing all the changes in the surroundings to the greatest extent possible. The other party was not alone. It was very likely that they were planning a sneak attack from behind. In the past, Incheon Daxiong had used this kind of despicable method to succeed. Sand. As the yellow sand continued to gather in the sky, the huge spinning ball of sand had already become more than 100 feet in size. From afar, it looked like a small mountain floating in the air. Boom! With a loud sound, the huge ball of sand in the air instantly fell to the ground and rolled in the fire snake's direction. In the process of rolling, the ball of sand continued to gather and absorb the yellow sand on the ground. It became bigger and bigger like a rolling snowball, pressing down like a mountain of sand. Whoosh! Seeing the incoming ball of sand, the fire snake once again raised its huge tail high, ready to attack. Rumble! As the rumbling sound got closer and closer, the ball of sand had already rushed to a distance of less than 100 feet from the fire snake. Whoosh! Seeing that the ball of sand had entered its attack range, the fire snake narrowed its eyes and suddenly slapped down with its long tail. Boom! Yellow sand flew everywhere and the earth shook. The mountain-like ball of sand was directly smashed into pieces by the fire snake's huge tail, turning into countless fine sand and rolling dust. The 100-bone skeleton's second attack was also neutralized by the fire snake. However, even so, Yi Fan, who was standing behind the fire snake, suddenly frowned. Something seemed to be wrong. According to common sense, after the 100-bone skeleton used the sandstorm, it was impossible for it to use the ball of sand to attack again. The reason was very simple. The sandstorm was far more powerful than the ball of sand. Since the fire snake was able to neutralize the sandstorm, it was naturally able to easily smash the ball of sand. Such a simple reason, it was impossible for evil beings to not understand. It was obvious that they had another purpose. Chapter 462. The evil creature had first used the sandstorm wall to attack from a long distance, then used the sand ball to attack further. On the surface, it seemed that the evil creature's attacks were logical and linked together. However, in Yi Fan's opinion, these two moves were simply feints. There was only one purpose, and that was to get as close to him and the fire snake as possible. Whoosh! When Yi Fan thought of this, he immediately used his movement skill. His figure flashed, and he instantly blocked the fire snake's path. If he didn't guess wrong, this evil creature was right in front of them. Whoosh! In the instant that Yi Fan's figure blocked the fire snake's path, countless huge and sharp sand cones suddenly shot out from the sand that filled the sky. They rushed toward Yi Fan and the fire snake with murderous intent. The sand cones were 1 foot thick and 3 feet long. They were completely condensed from fine sand, and they were like huge spears that continuously shot out from the sand. Originally, the distance between the sand and Yi Fan was less than 10 feet. Coupled with the astonishing speed of the sand cones, hundreds of sand cones had already rushed in front of Yi Fan and the fire snake in an instant. The fire snake's pupils contracted in an instant. It never thought that the sand ball that it had smashed into pieces would turn into countless sharp sand cones in an instant. Moreover, it came so suddenly. Yi Fan thought of something that it hadn't thought of. In a flash, Yi Fan's mind moved, and his palms moved at the same time. Surging and overbearing spiritual power instantly gushed out from his hands. Buzz! A 5-colored spiritual energy wall that was more than 10 feet thick, more than 10 feet wide, and more than 10 feet tall appeared in front of him out of thin air. The spiritual energy wall was intertwined with 5 colors. It was dazzling, and it was like a huge 5-colored crystal wall. Boom! 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 Countless loud sounds were heard, and hundreds of sharp and huge sand cones instantly collided with Yi Fan's 5-colored spiritual energy wall. Bang! 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 With a series of crisp sounds, the hundreds of sand cones formed by the yellow sand instantly exploded, turning into bursts of sand mist. Although the sand spikes formed by the 100-bone skeletons looked like they were made of sand, they were actually one of the 100-bone skeletons' killing moves. These sand spikes were formed by condensing sand using spiritual power. They were as hard as copper or iron, and were not inferior to steel swords. Not to mention a person, even an extremely hard rock would be pierced by these sand spikes. The power of this sand drill could be imagined. But then again, Yi Fan's 5-colored spirit chi wall wasn't a solid rock. The Xiantian secrets that he cultivated was an ancient secret technique. Its power was not below the heavenly constellation core of the heavenly court. When the sand all crashed into the spirit energy wall, it was no different from an ant trying to shake a tree or a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Whoosh! The fine sand formed by the sand spikes fell to the ground, forming piles of sand that were more than 3 feet high. When Yi Fan saw that the sand cone array had been broken, he immediately withdrew his spiritual aura back into his sea of chi. Behind him, the 100-feet-long fire snake had a shocked expression. Everything happened too quickly. It was so fast that it felt that it was inconceivable. It knew that Yi Fan's spiritual aura was extremely dense, but it didn't expect that his spiritual aura cultivation had reached such a realm. He was actually able to set up such an imposing spirit energy wall. Furthermore, it was a 5-colored spirit energy wall. According to what it knew, five-colored spirit energy was the purest form of spiritual power in the world. It could be said that it was the essence of the world and was extremely rare. It had been cultivating in this desert for more than 1,000 years. Every day, it would absorb the sun's true fire and refine its spiritual aura to return to its original state and form its dragon pearl. But even so, it had yet to cultivate to the realm of five-colored spirit energy. This young man actually managed to do something that it couldn't do after cultivating for more than 1,000 years. No wonder when this young man bowed to True Monarch Fire Dragon, True Monarch Fire Dragon said that it was overwhelmed by the favor. The eldritch that this true monarch spoke of was indeed not simple. Since you are already here, why are you sneaking around and not showing yourself? After Yi Fan withdrew his spiritual aura, he spoke calmly. He had already sensed the source of the corpse decay gas. There were two sources, and they were just 10 feet in front of him. Ha ha! I didn't expect you to have such ability at such a young age. This is truly unexpected. How rare, how rare. Following a burst of clear laughter, a white-robed man and woman appeared 10 feet away. The man had a devilish face, pale skin, black lips, and blood-red eyes. He wore a beautiful white robe, a jade-colored scholar's turban on his head, a jade-colored belt on his waist, and a white paper fan in his hand. He was dressed like a scholar. As for the woman, she had a delicate appearance. Dark clouds covered her temples. Her eyes were as black as ink, and her lips were scarlet red. She wore a jade-inlaid white robe and a jade-colored phoenix hairpin on her head. She had a slender waist and a devilish smile on her face. She looked at Yi Fan with a foolish smile. One of them had black eyes and one of them had red lips and black lip. They looked like ghosts. Their killing intent soared to the sky, making people feel extremely uncomfortable. It seems that the two of you must be Mr. Whitebone and Madam Whitebone. Yi Fan, who was standing with his hands behind his back, said to the two of them with a smile. Every time Yi Fan had the intention to kill, he would wear a smile on his face. Even though he was wearing a white jade mask, one could still feel the killing intent hidden behind his smile. The Whitebone couple emitted a killing intent, while Yi Fan emitted a devilish aura. Yi Fan's words shocked the two people in front of him, especially the Madam Whitebone. She stared at Yi Fan with a pair of black eyes that were as sharp as a knife. Chapter 463. Good news never leaves the door, but bad news spreads far and wide. Yi Fan smiled and said, "The two of you claim to be the gods of the desert, and you're talking about 10 pairs of boys and girls. You've really frightened the people here. Why, do you want to stand up for them, sir?" Madam of Bones stared at Yi Fan with her sharp eyes and said with a smile, "You're right." Yi Fan also stared at Madam of Bones and said calmly, "I'm standing up for them." Madam of Bones narrowed her eyes and prepared to take a step forward. The young man in front of her was extremely arrogant and looked down on everyone. This made her very angry. Over the past few hundred years, dozens of cultivation experts had died at their hands. However, this was the first time she had encountered someone with such an arrogant tone. She knew that this young man's cultivation was not simple, so she addressed him as Sir just now. Who would have thought that this fellow would not give her any face at all? One had to know that even in the demon realm, those great demons had to respectfully address her as Madam of Bones when they saw her. If she did not teach this ignorant brat a lesson, he would not know who he was talking to. Just as she was about to make a move, Whitebone Gentleman raised his arm and blocked her. Madam of Bones knew that in terms of cultivation, his wife was no match for this young man in front of him. The five-colored spirit chi wall that Yi Fan had set up earlier had left a deep impression on him. This was the first time he had seen an expert with such pure spirit chi cultivation. Madam of Bones looked at Madam of Bones with a puzzled expression. Instead of explaining to Madam of Bones directly asked Yi Fan, "How should I address you, brother?" "My surname is Yi. Yi Fan replied calmly. He did not need to hide his identity when dealing with these monsters. Mr. Yi, is there any enmity between us? Madam of Bones asked Yi Fan. Yi Fan shook his head. Since there's no enmity between us, why are you blocking our way, sir? Madam of Bones asked Yi Fan again. If you don't want people to know, don't do it in the first place. Yi Fan said to Mr. Whitebone calmly. It's true that I have no grudges with you and your wife, but what about the people in Fiery Dragon Town? Do they have any enmity with you too? This. Yi Fan's words left Whitebone gentleman speechless. Originally, he had wanted to reason with Yi Fan, but who would have thought that this young man not only had a profound cultivation, but was also very eloquent. With just a few words, he had refuted him until he was speechless. It's just 10 pairs of dolls. Why are you making such a big fuss? When Madam of Bones saw that her husband was at a loss for words, she immediately said, We already asked for too little. If the Demon King were here personally, we would have asked for at least 30 pairs of boys and girls. If that's the case, I have to thank you on behalf of the people of Fire Dragon Town. Yi Fan's voice started to turn cold as a cold light appeared in his eyes. 20 human lives were no different from animals in their eyes. If such a monster were to remain in this world, it would only cause the common people to suffer and plunge them into misery and suffering. A murderous aura began to spread from Yi Fan's body. Madam of Bones did not say anything. She turned her head to look at Mr. Whitebone, as if asking her husband if he should make a move immediately. She no longer had the patience to continue arguing with Yi Fan. Now, as long as Mr. Whitebone nodded, she would immediately make a move without mercy. Mr. Yi, Mr. Whitebone said to Yi Fan as he gestured for Madam of Bones to not make a move first, with all due respect, I'm afraid that many people have died in your hands, right? Mr. Whitebone's words made Yi Fan, who was under the white jade mask, frown. This Mr. Whitebone was indeed not simple. He could actually see this point. How is it, Mr. Yi? Am I right? Mr. Whitebone asked when he saw that Yi Fan did not answer. His cultivation level was far above Madam of Bones, and he had already mastered the yin-yang secret technique. With just a glance, he could see the number of people who had died in Yi Fan's hands. You're right. I have indeed killed hundreds of people, Yi Fan replied. Only the officials are allowed to set fires, but the common people are not allowed to light lamps, Mr. Whitebone said to Yi Fan with a smile. I'm afraid that you're being a little unreasonable, right? Those people who died in my hands all deserve to die, Yi Fan said coldly. People who deserved to die. Ha. Mr. Whitebone smiled and shook his head. Let me ask you, Mr. Whitebone, who are people who deserve to die? Mr. Whitebone's question immediately stunned Yi Fan. He had never thought about this question. In his opinion, as long as he wanted to kill someone, they all deserved to die. Obviously, this was not the real answer. In your opinion, those people do deserve to die, Mr. Whitebone continued. But have you ever thought that in their opinion, you also deserve to die? Yi Fan didn't say anything. Mr. Whitebone's words seemed to make some sense. In the eyes of those ninjas who died in his hands, he did deserve to die. The reason was simple. If he didn't deserve to die, they wouldn't want to kill him. In fact, there is no such thing as deserving death in this world, Mr. Whitebone said. Survival of the fittest, survival of the fittest. It's that simple. A tiger won't feel guilty for killing an antelope. In its opinion, the antelope was born to be its food, so it deserved to die. However, in the antelope's opinion, the tiger also deserved to die. It can eat hares, deer, and even wild wolves. However, the tiger didn't eat anything else but attacked itself. If this isn't deserving of death, then what is? Yi Fan listened quietly. The tiger thinks the antelope deserves to die, and the antelope thinks the tiger deserves to die. But what's the result? Mr. Whitebone stared at Yi Fan. Only one person died, and that was the antelope. This result wasn't caused by who deserved to die more, but by who had more power. The winner is king, and the strong are respected. That's all. The reason why you say that is because you are a tiger, not an antelope. Yi Fan looked at Mr. Whitebone. If you were an antelope, you wouldn't think so. You're right. I am indeed a tiger now. Bai Gu Langjun said to Yi Fan. But have you ever thought that once upon a time, we husband and wife were just antelopes that could be slaughtered by anyone? Mr. Whitebone's words suddenly made Yi Fan's heart move. You mean when you were alive? Yi Fan frowned and asked. That's right. Whitebone gentleman said, Do you know how we died back then? As he spoke, he looked back at Madame of Bones. Madame of Bones looked sad, as if she didn't want to talk about the past. Ruoyun and I were originally from Jiangxi. We grew up together and were childhood sweethearts. Mr. Whitebone's thoughts drifted back to 800 years ago. After we grew up, I became a teacher, and Ruoyun was still in her boudoir. We were in love with each other. Thinking back to the situation back then, the gentleman of White Bones smiled as he looked at the Madam of White Bones tenderly. It's all in the past. Why are you still bringing it up? Madam of Bones said softly. In order to marry Ruoyun, I lived frugally and saved 20 taels of silver in 2 years. I was prepared to use this money to propose marriage and marry Ruoyun. Mr. Whitebone continued, Who would have thought that when I happily rushed over with the betrothal gifts to propose marriage, Ruoyun's house was already hung with white silk and paper money flying everywhere. At this point, Mr. Whitebone's eyes were filled with tears, and his voice was choked with sobs. After asking, I found out from the servants that 3 days ago, the son of the county magistrate of the neighboring town led 3 groups of yamen runners and carried a palanquin with 8 carriers to barge into Ruoyun's house. They forced Ruoyun into the palanquin and left. Ruoyun's parents were already old, so they couldn't withstand such a situation. In a fit of anger, they both passed away. Don't say any more, Madame of Bones said as 2 streams of hot tears flowed out of her eyes. Yi Fan frowned after hearing this. After I heard about this, I ran to the government office of the neighboring town to look for Ruoyun like a madman. However, I was just a teacher who didn't have the strength to truss up a chicken. I wasn't a match for those evil yamen runners at all. Instead, I was beaten half to death by them. Mr. Whitebone continued, In order to save Ruoyun, I sold my family's property and went everywhere to complain. However, those corrupt officials protected each other. When they heard that I was going to sue the county magistrate's son, they directly kicked me out of the house, saying that I was slandering an official of the imperial court. They threatened me and said that if I came to complain again, they would throw me into prison and punish me. Yi Fan began to clench his fist. He was very familiar with the faces of those corrupt officials. Originally, my heart was like dead ashes and I wanted to end it all by killing myself. However, when I thought of Ruoyun's suffering, I dismissed the idea of killing myself. I can't die. The ones who should die are them. Mr. Whitebone gritted his teeth and said, I spent a lot of money to buy a 9th-ranked official's robe on the black market and bought a bag of arsenic from a pharmacy. After disguising myself, I pretended to be a low-ranked official who came to deliver gifts and came to the residence of that corrupt official's son. You killed him? Yi Fan raised his eyebrows and asked. That's right, Mr. Whitebone said. When I was serving tea to that official, I secretly put in the arsenic hidden in my fingernail. After that bastard drank my poisonous tea, he started to foam at the mouth and blood flowed out of his 7 orifices. He died. When he died, the residence immediately fell into chaos. I took this opportunity to find Ruoshue, who was locked in the room, and took her to escape. Yi Fan's tightly clenched fists relaxed. I knew that I had killed an official's son and pretended to be an official of the imperial court. The government would definitely search for me everywhere. There was no place for us in Jiangxi, Mr. Whitebone continued. Thus, I took Ruoyun out of the city in the middle of the night and fled all the way to the southwest desert. We prepared to cross the border and escape to a foreign country. You didn't escape and both of you died in the desert, right? Yi Fan asked. That's right. We didn't escape, Mr. Whitebone said. The desert here is filled with sand and sand. Ruoyun and I were not acclimatized to the environment and quickly lost our strength. Just as the two of us were in despair, a camel caravan happened to pass by. They saved you? Yi Fan asked Mr. Whitebone. Chapter 464. What? They killed you? Yi Fan asked in surprise. The result was far beyond his expectations. I thought that these people were merchants, but I never thought that they were desert bandits who specialized in robbing merchants. White-Bone Gentleman looked up at the endless starry sky as he spoke. There seemed to be flames dancing in his blood-red eyes. The bandit leader saw that my wife was beautiful, so he had evil intentions. He forcefully lifted my wife up, intending to humiliate her. I went forward to rescue her, but I was kicked down by his subordinate. Yi Fan stood in place, not saying a word. Ruoyun refused no matter what. In her panic, she bit the bandit leader's ear until it bled. Under the pain, the bandit leader went berserk and hit Ruoyun's head with his palm, killing my beloved wife on the spot. White-Bone Gentleman said with a face full of anger. Bastard! Yi Fan said angrily. When I saw that my beloved wife was killed, I crazily climbed up from the ground to fight that bastard. That bastard's subordinates saw that I suddenly went berserk, so they immediately held me down and used a knife to cut off all the tendons in my arms and legs. White-Bone Gentleman said with grief and indignation. My wife and I had just escaped from the wolf's den, but we entered the tiger's den. We became ghosts in a foreign land in this vast desert. Yi Fan frowned. He suddenly sympathized with the White-Bone Gentleman couple. Let me ask you, should that dog official's son be killed? White-Bone Gentleman turned his head to look at Yi Fan and asked loudly. He should be killed. Yi Fan answered. Those bandits, should they be killed? White-Bone Gentleman asked. They should be killed. Yi Fan answered again. That's right, they should be killed. They deserve to die 10,000 times. White-Bone Gentleman said bitterly. Before I died, I swore to the heavens that if I don't take revenge, the heavens and earth will destroy me. Yi Fan didn't say anything. He finally understood why this pair of lovebirds had become skeletons. The soaring resentment, the wronged background, the bloodshed love, and the unique geographical advantage of the desert caused this pair of infatuated lovers who should have entered the cycle of reincarnation to become both yin and yang demons. The heavens have eyes. After the two of us die, our yin souls will enter our yang bones and be refined into demons, White-Bone Gentleman said to Yi Fan. From now on, we can stay together forever. We will no longer suffer the pain of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and the pain of being homeless. As Mr. White-Bone spoke, he reached out and held Madame White-Bone's hand. The two of them looked at each other and smiled tenderly. Since you are already immortal, why do you still harm the people of Fire Dragon Town? Also, Yi Fan looked up at the two of them and asked coldly, were the hundreds of skeletons in the desert your doing? You're right. We are indeed immortal now. White-Bone Gentleman turned his head to look at Yi Fan and said calmly, but don't forget that there are still many people in the Taoist sect whose cultivation is far above ours. Even if the tiger doesn't hurt the man will hurt the tiger. As long as we don't become bone immortals, we will be in danger of being destroyed. Only when we become bone immortals can we really be carefree and live a carefree life in peace. If we want to become bone immortals, we have to feed on young boys and girls. There is no other way. As for the hundreds of skeletons in the desert you mentioned, Humph, they were indeed done by us. However, they were our enemies, so they deserved to die. Deserved to die? Yi Fan asked sternly. They are just a group of ordinary caravans. How could they have a grudge against you? Do you know that there are still underage children among them? Brother Yi, you are really muddle-headed. Why don't you think about it? We don't need to feed on ordinary people now. If there is no hatred, why do we have to do something superfluous and commit murder? White-boned gentleman said to Yi Fan, I won't hide it from you, Brother Yi. Those hundreds of people were the murderers who killed us in their previous lives. This time, they died in our hands. It is the cycle of the heavens, and karma is not good. Why is it wrong? Murderers in their previous lives? Yi Fan frowned after hearing this. You mean those people were the desert bandits in their previous lives? Yes, white-boned gentleman replied. Ruoyun and I have waited in this desert for 800 years. Finally, these people have appeared. Brother Yi, you only see the evil they suffered, but you don't think about the evil they planted back then. Yi Fan was silent. What white-boned gentleman said should be true. With his cultivation of more than 800 years, it was not difficult for him to see the past and present lives of ordinary people. It was natural and understandable to avenge the hatred of the previous life and resolve the old hatred of the previous life. All right, since that's the case, then let me ask you. Yi Fan coldly asked by Gu Langjun, from the time the two of you entered the Yang Bone realm until you reached the Bone Demon realm, the number of people whose flesh, blood, and primordial spirits have been sucked away by the two of you is probably more than 10,000. How do you explain this? Mr. Yi, you're really amazing. You even know about this clearly, Bai Gu Langjun said to Yi Fan calmly. That's right. Since we died, we've been cultivating for more than 800 years. During these 800 years, more than 10,000 people have died in our hand. But let me tell you, those who died in our hands were all evil people in this desert. They were either bandits or criminals who were preparing to escape to the border. None of them were good people, and none of them were wronged. To be honest, if we didn't keep an eye on them in this desert, this rich and remote Hualong town would have been looted by those outlaws many times. How could it still be like today? Hearing this, Yi Fan finally understood. The white-boned gentleman and his wife could not leave the desert during their cultivation. In this way, the bandits in the desert became their target. At first, Yi Fan had been wondering why there was no large number of horse gangs who came to rob the Hualong town, which was so remote and rich and far away from the imperial army. Now he understood that it was not that no one coveted the wealth here, but that all the people who coveted the wealth had become the food of the white-boned gentleman and his wife. No wonder they called themselves the gods of the desert. What do you think, Mr. Yi? White-boned gentleman said to Yi Fan. Now you understand the truth of the matter. Hualong is not the only one who protects Hualong town. I hope you can understand our difficulties. I understand your difficulties, but it doesn't mean that I agree with your way of doing things, Yi Fan said calmly. Mr. Yi, you mean? Madam of Bones asked. I don't care what you did before, and I don't want to care. However, Yi Fan said as he looked at white-boned gentleman. His voice was cold and determined. You can't take away the 10 pairs of boys and girls in Hualong town. We have protected Hualong town for so many years. Can't we even satisfy such a small request? Madam of Bones raised her eyebrows and said, with all due respect, the real purpose of protecting Hualong town is actually for your own cultivation, Yi Fan said. If you two really want to protect this place, you should benefit the people here, not exchange the lives of 20 babies for it. You. Madam of Bones was speechless by Yi Fan. What? Am I wrong? Yi Fan asked. You have to sacrifice 20 lives to protect the town. How can there be such a logic in the world? Mr. Yi, to be honest, I don't want to do this either, white-boned gentleman said to Yi Fan. But I just said that if you want to cultivate to become a bone immortal, you have to feed on boys and girls. There's no other way. I hope you won't make things difficult for us. I'm not making things difficult for you. On the contrary, I'm saving you. Yi Fan said to the two of them, the heavens are virtuous. The two of you have an immortal body now, and it's already a blessing from the heavens. If you continue to be stubborn and harm the people, the two of you will regret it in the future. Yi Fan was speaking from the bottom of his heart. In his previous life, Eldritch had incurred the wrath of the upper realm because he had killed too many people. In the end, he had ended up dispersing his cultivation and self-destructing. Now, his current life was full of disasters, and it was difficult for him and his wife to reconcile. It was because of the evil deeds he had done in his previous life. The people Eldritch had killed were all evil people. If the white-boned gentleman and his wife were to harm innocent people, they would not be able to escape the wrath of thunder in the future. The heavens are virtuous? Humph. White-boned gentleman sneered. I'm just saying this for the people of the world to hear. When Royun was killed, where was the heavens virtuous? When the tendons of my hands and feet were cut off and I was trapped in the desert waiting for death, where was the heavens virtuous? Those people did evil in their previous lives, and they were punished in this life, which is the result. There must be a cause and an effect. Yi Fan said to White-boned gentleman, as for the suffering you and your wife have suffered, it must have been predestined in your previous lives. Ha ha! Predestined in our previous lives. White-boned gentleman's calm face began to twist. Since it was predestined in our previous lives, then the 10 pairs of babies in Flaming Dragon Town were also predestined in our previous lives to be eaten by us. Yi Fan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and slowly shook his head. The white-boned gentleman and his wife were too resentful, and they had already lost their rationality. His persuasion had no effect at all. As I said before, the winner is the king, and the strong are respected. Today, I will definitely take those 10 pairs of babies in Flaming Dragon Town. White-boned gentleman stared at Yi Fan with his blood-red eyes, and his gaze was cold. Husband, let's not talk nonsense with him. Let's kill him. Seeing that her husband and Yi Fan had already shed all pretense of cordiality, the white-boned lady immediately revealed her ferocious look. Don't force me to make a move, Yi Fan said coldly as he opened his eyes. His gaze was bone-chilling. Since things had come to this point, there was no need for him to continue persuading them. It seemed that today's fierce battle was inevitable. You are the one who is forcing us, White-boned gentleman said coldly as he waved his sleeves in front of him. Schwa! A ghastly white skull mask appeared on his face. With his pale white mask and blood-red eyes, the current white-boned gentleman looked like an evil demon. Schwa! Seeing that her husband had changed his appearance, the white-boned lady also waved her sleeves in front of her and put on a skull mask. Hiss! The fire snake behind Yi Fan let out a hiss and slowly walked to Yi Fan's side. Chapter 465. Whoosh! A cloud of sand rose under by Gu Longjuan's feet. Then, with a flash, he turned into a white streak and rushed toward Yi Fan. Whoosh! White-boned gentleman's speed was so fast that the yellow sand on the ground was blown away by the strong wind created by his movement technique, leaving behind a path of sand that was more than a foot wide. Yi Fan, who was wearing the white jade mask, did not move. He just stood there with his hands behind his back. For other people, Bai Gu Longjuan's speed was extremely fast. However, for someone who had reached the realm of earth-shattering, this speed was no different from taking a stroll in the park. Even the slightest movement of white-boned gentleman could be seen clearly by him. Bang! When he was less than 5 feet away from Yi Fan, Bai Gu Langjun opened the paper fan in his hand. Buzz! When the white paper fan was completely opened, a mass of white light enveloped it. This white paper fan was a treasure that he had refined for hundreds of years. It was called the Yin-Yang Wind Fire Fan. It was 1 foot long and 3 inches wide. It was bone-colored and as gentle as jade. Bai Gu Langjun had refined this fan with a demon bone in his body. It contained the yin and yang qi, as well as the essence of wind and fire. Could be big or small, and it could change into anything. The yin-yang wind fire fan also had a unique use. If it was fanned forward, yin wind would howl, and sand and stones would fly. If it was fanned backward, yang fire would soar into the sky, and flames would rise. That was how the yin-yang wind fire fan got its name. The sandstorm at the beginning was caused by this fan. It was easy to imagine how powerful this fan was. In the blink of an eye, Bai Gu Langjun, who was holding the yin-yang wind fire fan, was already in front of Yi Fan. Whoosh! Using the force of his charge, Bai Gu Langjun stretched out his arm and flicked his wrist. The wind fire fan, which was wrapped in white light, suddenly slashed horizontally at Yi Fan's neck. This was a move that Bai Gu Langjun had carefully planned. On the surface, this move looked very ordinary. It was full of flaws. However, in reality, it was full of hidden killing intent. Every step was frightening. It should be known that the wind fire fan in Bai Gu Longjuan's hand could change its size at will. The moment White Bone Gentleman slashed across Yi Fan's neck, he secretly activated his treasured fan and made it grow by 3 feet. At the same time, he activated the wind chi within the treasured fan, causing it to release a sharp blade-like airflow. The high-speed figure, the explosively expanding treasured fan, and the blade-like wind were the 3 of them. They interlocked with each other, and in addition to White Bone Gentleman's nimble and agile moves, they formed a chain of attacks. Even if Yi Fan could avoid the fan, he would still be killed by the high-pressure wind. The reason why Bai Gu Langjun had used this move was to confuse Yi Fan and make him underestimate his opponent. Then, he would be able to take his life in an instant. 1. The yin-yang wind and fire fan that was slashing towards Yi Fan's neck suddenly expanded by 3 feet, and a white light erupted. Shwa! A dazzling arc of light shot out from the edge of the fan. You're dead meat this time, the Lord of White Bones thought to himself. The corners of his mouth curled up, revealing an evil smile. He seemed to be able to see Yi Fan's head falling to the ground, and his blood staining the yellow sand. Although this young man with the surname Yi had a profound cultivation base, which was rare in the world, he was still inexperienced and inexperienced. He did not know that the people in the world were sinister. The most frightening thing was not the supreme cultivation base. The most frightening thing was the human heart. He had cultivated for more than 800 years. In these 800 years, he had seen all kinds of evil people and seen all kinds of despicable method. In front of him, Yi Fan was like a child. He could easily take this young man's life with just a few random methods. However, he was wrong. The scene that he wanted to see did not appear. Yi Fan was indeed very young. He was only 23 years old. However, age did not have much to do with actual combat experience. Boom! The white light from the flying sword spread out in all directions. Yi Fan stretched out one of his hands and directly grabbed the yin-yang wind and fire fan that was slashing towards him from the side. Boom! The huge wave of air that was stirred up blew a 3 feet deep sand pit in the desert under their feet. Boom! The sharp white light from the wind and fire fan rushed into the decorated archway behind Yi Fan at high speed. The 30 feet tall archway was directly cut in half and fell to the ground with a loud bang. Under the skull mask, Bai Gu Longjuan's eyes were wide open. It seemed that he could not believe what was happening in front of him. His meticulously planned move was actually so easily blocked by this person. Yi Fan's eyes were cold as he looked straight at Bai Gu Langjun. This time, he only blocked and did not attack. In his opinion, Bai Gu Langjun was not an unforgivable evil person. In fact, he could be considered a pitiful person. Whoosh! Bai Gu Langjun withdrew his wind and fire fan from Yi Fan's hand and flew back 30 feet. Why didn't you fight back? Bai Gu Langjun asked Yi Fan coldly. I was trying to save people, not kill people. Yi Fan looked at Bai Gu Langjun calmly. As long as you turn over a new leaf and stop harming people, I will not make things difficult for you. What if we don't agree? Bai Gu Langjun raised his eyebrows and asked. Then I can only kill you, Yi Fan said coldly. Kill us? Humph. Bai Gu Langjun sneered and said, There are more than 100 people who have said this to us. However, they are no longer in this world. I am an exception, Yi Fan said calmly. If you don't believe me, you can try. Shameless boasting. Bai Gu Langjun said, as he opened the wind and fire fan in his hand again, and waved it fiercely at Yi Fan, who was 30 feet away. Whoosh! A chilly wind blew, and sand flew everywhere. A gust of wind swept up the sand in the sky and madly rushed toward Yi Fan. In the midst of the chilly wind and sand, the faint sound of ghosts crying could be heard. This treasured fan contained the essence of wind and fire, as well as the power of yin and yang. Usually, after the Bai Gu Langjun couple finished absorbing the flesh, blood, and primordial spirits of living people, they would seal their souls in the wind and fire fan. When they needed to use it, they would directly release the souls to form the powerful wind and fire ghost array. These lonely souls who had been killed by the Bai Gu Langjun couple were all evil people when they were alive. Originally, they were born with a murderous aura. After being killed by the Bai Gu Langjun couple and sealed in the wind and fire fan, their resentment soared to the sky, and they were extremely manic. Whoosh! As the violent wind got closer and closer to Yi Fan, the group of ghosts in the wind and sand began to gradually show their ferocious faces. In the wind and sand, countless ferocious evil ghosts bared their fangs and brandished their claws. They roared violently and rushed toward Yi Fan in an overwhelming manner. When Yi Fan saw the group of ghosts coming toward him, he immediately squinted his eyes and prepared to use the Li Hua heavenly weapon hanging in his white robe. Last time, when he had saved Akatsuki from the ghosts in the Sisui River, he had used the Li Hua heavenly sword. The Li Hua heavenly sword's overbearing firepower and rising yang energy. It was the deadly nemesis of otherworldly items. However, just as Yi Fan was about to pull out the Li Hua heavenly sword, the fire snake beside him made its move. It lowered its head and opened its mouth. In an instant, a huge red ball of light appeared in its huge mouth. The red light in the snake's mouth was dazzling. The red ball of light was about 5 feet in size. The red light was blazing and dazzling, and it was very eye-catching in this pitch-black night. Whoosh! The fire snake retracted its neck and suddenly stretched it forward. At the same time, it spat out a raging fire. Whoosh! A huge pillar of fire more than 10 feet in diameter shot out from the fire snake's mouth and shot toward the group of ghosts in the wind and sand. The raging flames illuminated the sand several thousand feet around the fire serpent in a sea of red light. Seeing the fire snake make its move, Yi Fan couldn't help but secretly scold himself for being foolish. The fire snake gathered the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and absorbed the true fire of the sun. Its flame cultivation was unparalleled. It was the most suitable to deal with the group of ghosts in the wind. It seemed that the two of them were getting more and more tacit. Chi, roar! The domineering flames that the fire snake spat out rushed toward the violent wind and sand, roasting the group of ghosts that were about to break out of the wind and turning them into green smoke in an instant. Whoosh! The fire snake continuously turned its huge head and used its domineering flames to sweep back and forth. Then, they saw, where the smoke was, there were tens of thousands of red lights. Where the fire was, there were thousands of red flames. The fire borrowed the strength of the wind, and the golden snake danced wildly. The wind helped the fire, and the sky and earth changed color. The raging flames illuminated Yi Fan's gorgeous white jade mask and the ferocious skull mask of White Bone Gentleman. When the ghostly howls gradually died down, the fire snake stopped spitting out flames from its mouth. In the blink of an eye, the powerful Yin Wind ghost array disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Yi Fan reached out and patted the body of the fire snake beside him with a smile on his face. He liked this big guy more and more. The fire snake turned its head to look at Yi Fan and hissed in a low voice as a response. On the other side, White Bone Gentleman's face was gloomy under the skull mask. His blood-red eyes looked resentfully at the fire snake beside Yi Fan. The group of ghosts that had been sealed for more than 800 years had been wiped out by the fire snake in less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea. How could he not feel angry? He only cared about fighting with Yi Fan and forgot that there was such an expert beside Yi Fan. The fire snake shook its huge head and coldly stared at White Bone Gentleman with its pair of snake eyes. Before this, it and the White Bone couple had always minded their own business in the desert. They coexisted peacefully and did not invade each other. What the White Bone couple killed were people who committed crimes, rapists and robbers. The fire snake saved ordinary people trapped in the desert and the passing caravans. To a certain extent, both sides had a tacit understanding. However, it was different now. The White Bone couple's greed broke this rare tacit understanding. The 10 pairs of virgin boys and girls made the two sides, who had nothing to do with each other, suddenly stand against each other. It had already made a mistake once. This time, it could not make the same mistake again. White Bone Gentleman looked at the dragon-like fire snake and narrowed his eyes. He did not want to become enemies with the fire snake. After all, this fire snake was a spiritual creature of heaven and earth and was the son of the true Lord of Fire Dragon. He understood the principle of not giving face to the monk but to the Buddha. However, the result was good. He did not look for trouble with the fire snake, but the fire snake did not give him an inch and burned away his een-wind ghost array. This was intolerable. Since the fire snake took the initiative to provoke him, he did not have to worry anymore. Today, he would take this beast's life. You broke my een-wind ghost array. You deserve to die. White Bone Gentleman gnashed his teeth as he spoke. He then used the yin-yang wind and fire fan in his hand to cut the fire snake across the air. Whoosh! A huge white arc of light suddenly shot out from the yin-yang wind and fire fan, whistling towards the fire snake's vital point. This time, White Bone Gentleman used his true move. The arc of light he shot out was condensed from his own yin energy. It was soft, tough, and extremely sharp. Whoosh! The white arc of light was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it was less than 3 meters away from the fire snake's vital point. At this time, the fire snake had already revealed its true body. It was not easy for its huge body to quickly dodge White Bone Gentleman's arc of light. Seeing that White Bone Gentleman's arc of light was already in front of it, the fire snake activated the dragon pearl on its head and prepared to use its spiritual energy to disperse the arc of light. Chapter 466. Whoosh! Yi Fan, who had instantly appeared in front of Fire Snake, waved his sleeves at the white arc of light that was rapidly approaching him. A tyrannical and invisible spiritual energy surged out of his body and directly rushed toward the white arc of light that was 1 zhang away. Boom! White light splashed, and waves of air surged. The sharp arc of light that White Bone Gentleman had released was directly scattered by Yi Fan's spiritual energy, turning into specks of light that scattered into the surroundings. Just now, Fire Snake had helped Yi Fan dissolve the yin-wind ghost array. This time, Yi Fan had helped Fire Snake block the spiritual energy arc of light. The man and the snake each displayed their strengths and had a tacit understanding of each other. Fire Snake lowered its head to look at Yi Fan and nodded slightly. Yi Fan raised his head to look at Fire Snake and nodded in response. White Bone Gentleman frowned slightly. This Fire Snake and this brat surnamed Yi were one big and one small. They were both good at both offense and defense, each displaying their strengths and each dodging their weaknesses. They were indeed not easy to deal with. 2 against 1, what kind of skill is that? Madame of Bones, who was at the side, saw that her husband's attacks were continuously thwarted, and her anger surged. She stretched out one of her hands and lightly waved it in the air. Whoosh! A black saber appeared out of thin air in front of her. The saber was 4 chi long, and its name was Soul Slayer. Black light lingered around it, and energy rose from it. On the saber's body, there were 13 skulls of various sizes. What was even stranger was that each of the skulls on the saber had different expressions. Happiness, anger, sorrow, joy, sorrow, fear, surprise, and everything. Just like the yin-yang wind and fire fan in White Bone Gentleman's hands, this Soul Slayer saber was also a divine weapon that Madame of Bones had refined for several hundred years. Unlike the wind and fire power of the wind and fire fan, this saber's profoundness lay in the fact that once a life was harmed by this saber, the essence of the victim's soul would be completely absorbed by the skulls on the saber. As for the souls that had their essence sucked away, their souls would scatter and turn into nothingness. More than 10,000 people had died in the hands of Madame of Bones. One could imagine how powerful this soul-slaughtering saber was. The appearance of the soul-slaying blade caused Yi Fan's smile to immediately turn serious. He keenly sensed the endless resentment emanating from the saber. This resentment was completely different from the resentment of the group of ghosts that White Bone Gentleman had just released. The resentment of the group of ghosts came from the vengeful spirits themselves, and it was stimulated. The resentment emitted by the saber in the Madame of Bones' hand seemed to be released in satisfaction, and it was emitted on its own accord. Yi Fan, who had seen all kinds of evil weapons, knew that this saber had already gained sentience. In terms of cultivation, White Bone Gentleman might be slightly superior to Madame of Bones, but in terms of resentment, Madame of Bones could be said to be far superior to White Bone Gentleman. To the White Bones Gentleman, he had only lost his beloved wife and his own life, but to the Madame of Bones, she had not only lost that, but also her elderly parents. She was a woman, and she had been humiliated and died tragically. Her parents had died suddenly, so it was reasonable for her resentment to be far greater than White Bone Gentleman's. "Ye, give me your life." The furious Madame of Bones held the soul-slaughtering saber with one hand and used a ghostly movement technique. She turned into a white stream and went straight for Yi Fan. Hiss! The fire snake hissed and swung its long snake tail, sweeping it at the incoming white stream. Whoosh! When White Bone Gentleman saw that the fire snake had attacked, he immediately shook his wrist and used the treasured fan in his hand to fan the fire snake and Yi Fan. Whoosh! A violent storm arose and sand and stones flew everywhere. White Bone Gentleman was worried that his beloved wife was in danger, so he wanted to use the wind and sand to cover her. Yi Fan and the fire snake's line of sight was immediately blocked by the flying sand. Whoosh! Taking advantage of the sandstorm, White Bone Gentleman's figure flickered, and he also turned into a streak of white light, rushing forward at high speed. The husband and wife were of the same mind, and their sharpness could cut through metal. The two of them had been cultivating in this desert for more than 800 years. They had long mastered the art of see-through. Not to mention a sandstorm, even if there was a 10 feet thick sand wall in front of them, the two of them would still be able to see clearly everything within 100 miles of the wall. While the sandstorm temporarily blocked their opponent's line of sight, they would take down their opponent in one fell swoop. Whoosh! 2 streams of white light rushed toward the sandstorm like meteors chasing after the moon. Whoosh! The fire snake's huge tail whizzed out of the sandstorm and swept toward the husband and wife. The fire serpent's attack was powerful and heavy, and its speed was extremely fast. If one were to be swept by it, even if one's body was made of iron, they would still be smashed into pieces. However, the bone couple, whose eyes could see through things, had long seen through the intention of the fire snake's attack. In the instant that the fire snake's huge tail was about to sweep across the two of them, the couple abruptly raised their bodies and leaped high into the air, nimbly avoiding the fire snake's attack and pouncing towards Yi Fan's direction from above. To shoot a man, shoot the horse first. To catch bandits, catch the leader first. Compared to the fire snake, this young man surnamed Yi was their greatest threat. As long as they killed him, the fire snake would not be their match. The two of them waved their weapons and mercilessly used their killing moves. Whoosh! White Bone Gentleman turned his wrist, and the yin-yang wind and fire fan in his hand suddenly fanned backward. A huge fireball, about 10 feet in size, rolled out from the fan. Whoosh! After the fireball appeared, White Bone Gentleman fanned the fan in his hand again. Whoosh! A huge gust of wind rose out of nowhere. Whoosh! The violent gust of wind blew the huge fireball up, and it spun toward Yi Fan, who was behind the sandstorm. Madame of Bones raised the saber in her hand high in the air. At the same time, she held the saber with both hands and suddenly slashed down. The speed of the saber was so fast that it formed a black light screen from top to bottom. Whoosh! As the soul-slaughtering saber in Madame of Bones' hand slashed down, a black light arc more than 10 feet long suddenly rushed out from the soul-slaughtering saber at high speed, heading straight for Yi Fan. Gust of wind, flame, and saber. 3 killing moves attacked Yi Fan from different directions at the same time. Hiss! The fire snake hissed as it quickly turned its tail. At the same time, it swayed its body, preparing to block White Bone Gentleman's fireball for Yi Fan. It was the fire snake, and White Bone Gentleman's flames could not hurt it at all. However, this time, the fire snake did not succeed in blocking White Bone Gentleman's fireball. The couple's speed was too fast, and they were using the sandstorm as cover. By the time the fire snake saw their moves clearly, the fireball and saber had already rushed in front of Yi Fan. Whoosh! The huge fireball soared into the sky, and the heat wave was oppressive. Whoosh! The saber with black light wrapped around it slashed down from the sky, arriving in the blink of an eye. Facing the couple's 2 killing moves, Yi Fan, who was inside the sandstorm, closed his eyes and slowly stretched out his right palm, pushing it forward. A white light flashed in his palm. Seeing Yi Fan slowly stretch out his right palm, White Bone Gentleman smiled under the skull mask. His smile was like a ghost smile. He knew in his heart that Yi Fan was definitely going to use the spirit chi wall again. This was something he had expected. What he wanted was for Yi Fan to use this move. The reason was very simple. The soul-slaughtering saber in his wife's hand was not only able to slaughter souls, but it also had a huge secret, which was that it specialized in destroying spirit chi. White Bone Gentleman was well aware of how powerful the soul-slaughtering saber was after absorbing the power of tens of thousands of souls. Souls and the essence of souls were 2 completely different concepts. Man was the spirit of all living things. The 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls were the essence of man, and the essence of the soul was the essence of the essence. It was like how steel was the essence of iron ore. The reason why mountain spirits and wild monsters harmed people was to absorb people's souls and help them cultivate. Unfortunately, they were mutants and could only devour souls, but they could not absorb the essence of the 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. However, the White Bone couple was different. They were humans when they were alive, and their yin souls entered their yang bones after death. Their souls and physical souls were still there, and they had both yin and yang. In addition, they had absorbed the pure yin and yang qi in the desert, so they were naturally incomparable to those mountain spirits and wild monsters. However, even so, Madame of Bones did not absorb the power of the souls into her body for her own use. It was not because she did not want to, but because the tens of thousands of people who had died in her hands were all evil people, and their resentment was too strong. If she forcefully absorbed it, she would definitely suffer a backlash and lose her mind. After thinking about it, she decided to use the essence of the souls to forge a weapon. Weapons were different from people. They could bear a domineering power without suffering a backlash. She used star sand iron as the material, phosphorus bones as the firewood, yellow sand as the mold, and human blood to quench the fire. She directly forged the soul-slaughtering saber with the essence of the souls. On the day the saber was forged, winds howled angrily and black chi surged. In the past several hundred years, Madame of Bones had relied on this soul-slaughtering saber to kill dozens of top-notch experts with high cultivation bases. This time, Madame of Bones directly used this saber in order to break Yi Fan's spirit chi wall and completely kill him. Buzz! White light erupted from Yi Fan's palm, dazzling and resplendent. Madame of Bones' lips curled into an evil smile. This brat is really using a spirit chi wall. The couple looked at each other and smiled, as if victory was in their hands. However, what happened next made the two of them unable to laugh anymore. Whoosh! White light exploded from Yi Fan's palm, and a huge ice wall instantly appeared in front of Yi Fan. The ice wall was 7 feet thick, about 10 feet wide, and hundreds of feet tall. It was sparkling and translucent, and cold mist rose from it. Boom! The huge fireball rushed into the huge ice wall, which was overflowing with light and color. Whoosh! White smoke rose, and the huge fireball instantly disappeared into nothingness. Boom! Madame of Bones' soul-slaughtering saber descended from the sky and slashed into the ice wall. Whoosh! The incomparably sharp soul-slaughtering saber directly slashed into the ice wall, all the way to the hilt. Whoosh! Madame of Bones held the soul-slaughtering saber in her hand and went with the momentum. Crack! A huge hole was forcibly cut open in the huge ice wall. However, even so, the ice wall still stood there, not moving at all. This scene stunned the couple, who had already thought that victory was in their hands, and they were dumbfounded. Yi Fan was not using a spirit chi wall, but an ice wall. The two of them had miscalculated. At this moment Yi Fan, who was behind the transparent ice wall, made his move again. He stretched out one palm, exerted force in his hand, and suddenly struck the 7-foot-thick ice wall with his palm. Bang! The huge ice wall was hit by Yi Fan's single palm, and it instantly collapsed and exploded. White light flashed everywhere, and silver dust swirled in the air. At this moment, the couple was still completely immersed in the shock just now and had not recovered at all. Chapter 467. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, the huge ice blocks that filled the sky completely buried the two of them, like a small mountain. After Yi Fan used the ice blocks to suppress the bone couple, he didn't stop at all. He slowly aimed his palm at the huge ice pile in front of him and exerted force in his palm. Whoosh! A white beam of cold air gushed out from his palm and shot straight at the huge ice pile. Crack! The ice mountain that was piled up by broken ice instantly merged into one. After doing all this, Yi Fan slowly lowered his arm. Just now, when the White Bones couple had attacked him, he had sensed that something was wrong. They had seen his spirit chi wall before. Knowing that they couldn't succeed, they still used flames and sword arcs to attack. This didn't make sense at all. Unless they already had a way to break his spirit chi wall. Yi Fan understood in his heart that this was not something impossible for a demon. Back then, Inchan Daxiong was able to feed on the other party's spirit chi. This bone couple might have a similar technique. The moment he raised his arm, he was keenly aware of the sneer hidden under White Bone Gentleman's mask. It was a sneer that indicated that victory was within his grasp. This sneer made Yi Fan even more certain of his conjecture. This bone couple must have a way to break his spirit chi wall. In a flash, Yi Fan suddenly urged the ice core in his body. He directly used the core formation technique that Cui Ziwen taught him to release the biting cold air of the ice core. This method seemed to be the most reliable one at the moment. It could not only dissolve White Bone Gentleman's fireballs, but also condense a solid ice wall without using spiritual power to block the Bone Lady's black sword arcs. Because it was his first time using this core formation technique, and because his body didn't have the fire snake's core to neutralize it, Yi Fan didn't release too much of the cold air of the ice core. After all, the nidin in his body was the extreme north ice snake's 1,000-year cultivation item. The cold chi was not to be underestimated. Once it went berserk in his body, not only would he not be able to control the enemy, he might even be harmed instead. After a short moment of consideration, Yi Fan released 20% of his ice core's cold chi. However, what shocked him was that 20% of the ice core could actually form such a huge ice wall. If 20% of the cold energy was already like this, then wouldn't it be able to form a mountain of ice if he released 100% of it? While he was shocked, Yi Fan was even more certain of his judgment. The facts proved that his speculation was correct. Madame of Bone's black saber was indeed not simple. It was actually able to cut a hole more than 3 feet deep in the ice wall. One had to know that this ice wall was formed from the ice snake's 1,000-year ice core. It was as hard as steel and as hard as iron. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as an impenetrable wall. Even such a solid ice wall could be cut open. If he had used the spirit chi wall just now, he didn't know what would have happened. Fortunately, the ice snake couple had been sealed by his cold energy. With this thought in mind, Yi Fan let out a long sigh. Hiss! The fire snake's hissing interrupted Yi Fan's train of thought. Yi Fan looked up at the fire snake and discovered that the fire snake was vigilantly staring at the huge chunk of ice on the ground. Buzz! Just as Yi Fan was puzzled by the fire snake's expression, several faint blue rays of light shot out from the chunk of ice. Yi Fan abruptly turned to look at the chunk of ice with furrowed brows. Crack! A crisp sound rang out, and a small crack appeared on the chunk of ice that was emitting cold energy. Crack, crack, crack. Along with the crisp sound, countless fine lines began to gradually crack open on the huge chunk of ice. Buzz! Buzz! The blue light within the chunk of ice grew brighter and brighter, flashing incessantly. Whoosh! When the entire chunk of ice turned completely blue, countless dazzling blue rays of light shot out from the cracks in an instant, dazzling and blinding. Boom! A loud sound rang out, and the ground trembled as bits of silver flew everywhere. The huge chunk of ice instantly burst open, turning into countless sparkling and translucent ice shards that fell from the sky. Whoosh! Whoosh! At the same time that the chunk of ice burst open, 2 streaks of white light instantly rose from the ground and went straight up into the sky. Yi Fan looked up with a dignified expression. He saw the ice snake couple hovering in the air, looking down coldly at him. The 13 skulls on the soul slaughtering knife in her hand had already turned blue. It's this knife again. Yi Fan frowned. It was obvious that they had relied on this knife to break out of the ice. If he wanted to subdue them today, he would have to destroy this evil knife first. I didn't expect you to have this ice sealing technique. I really underestimated you, the ice snake said coldly in midair. Same here, Yi Fan replied. The saber in your wife's hand has truly broadened my horizons. You are the first one in 800 years to be able to dodge my soul-slaughtering blade. Madame of Bones, who was holding the blade with one hand, said coldly to Yi Fan, however, you are also the last one. You're right. I'll be the last one. Yi Fan narrowed his eyes and looked at the ice snake lady quietly. Because I'll destroy this evil knife of yours. How arrogant! The ice snake lady shouted from midair, and then suddenly activated the soul-slaughtering knife in her hand. Buzz! The soul-slaughtering knife let out a whine, and the eyes of the 13 skulls on the knife instantly turned blood-red. Whoosh! 13 ghostly blue flames spewed out from the mouths of the 13 skulls. In the blink of an eye, the 4-foot-long soul-slaughtering knife was surrounded by ghostly flames. The eyes of the 13 skulls with different expressions on the knife's body glowed red, and their mouths spewed blazing flames. The combination of blue and red caused the evil aura to surge to the sky. The long-haired ice snake lady held the knife with both hands and raised it above her head. Her pitch-black eyes were fixed on Yi Fan on the ground. Her gaze was cold as if she was looking at a dead person. What a good soul-slaughtering evil knife! Yi Fan sighed inwardly as he looked at the evil weapon in the Ice Snake Lady's hand. If I don't destroy this evil knife today, who knows how many lives will be lost to this knife in the future? At that thought, Yi Fan reached into his white robe with one hand and pulled out the ever-fire sword that was hanging inside. Clang! Accompanied by the roar of a tiger and dragon, the ever-fire sword, which was surrounded by red light and blazing flames, was unsheathed. When they saw the divine weapon in Yi Fan's hand, the Ice Snake Lady blurted out at the same time, "The ever-fire sword." They would never have thought that this peerless divine weapon would be in the hands of this young man. The Ice Snake Lady had heard of the ever-fire sword's great name from the Demon King. It was said that this sword had endless magical uses and boundless divine flames. Its power was so strong that it could burn all things. It could be said to be a secret weapon among secret weapons, a divine weapon among divine weapons. The Ice Snake Lady's expression turned serious. The Ice Snake Lady also frowned. The two of them looked at each other with complicated expressions. This young man with the surname Yi had a high cultivation level, a special technique, and a divine weapon. It could be said that he was almost perfect and invulnerable. The Ice Snake Lady, whose hair danced in the wind, said sternly, "I want to see how powerful the legendary Ever-Fire Divine Sword is today." As she spoke, she slashed down with the soul-slaughtering knife that was burning with ghostly flames. "Soul-slaughtering extermination!" the Ice Snake Lady shouted under the skull mask. Whoosh! A huge arc of blue flames that was as thick as a bowl shot out from the soul-slaughtering knife in her hand. The arc of the knife was more than 100 feet long. Like a huge whip of light, it came crashing down toward Yi Fan on the ground. Woo! 13 skulls with glowing red eyes appeared in the blue whip of light. Their mouths were spitting fire as they let out incessant howls. This time, the Ice Snake Lady was serious. She directly used her trump card that she hadn't used in hundreds of years. She couldn't hold back in the slightest when facing an expert like Yi Fan. On the ground, Yi Fan raised his head and shouted, "Come at me!" With a thought, he quickly mobilized 50% of the spiritual energy in his energy reserve and activated the Ever-Fire sword in his hand. Clang! Under the activation of 50% of Yi Fan's spiritual energy, the Ever-Fire sword let out an excited cry. In an instant, it shone with a bright red light and the flames soared. The soaring flames illuminated the desert under Yi Fan's feet in a fiery red color. Whoosh! The ice fragments scattered around Yi Fan instantly melted and turned into steam. Amidst the surging heat, Yi Fan held the sword with one hand and looked up at the flaming whip of light that was rapidly descending from the sky. His white robes fluttered in the wind. Whoosh! The Ice Snake Lady's huge whip of light that was aimed at Yi Fan was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had rushed between the two of them. Smack! Yi Fan gripped the sword with both hands and abruptly flicked the blazingly fire sword upwards. This was a move that his beloved wife, Fujiwara no Chiko, had taught him back then. It was extremely powerful and was most suitable for a bottom-up attack. Whoosh! A red whip of light shot out from the tip of the Ever-Fire sword and whizzed upward. The whip of light was about a foot thick and over 100 feet long. It was surrounded by flames, and it soared into the sky like a ferocious flaming dragon. Whoosh! The Ice Snake Lady's soul-slaughtering whip of light was filled with dense ghostly flames and came down menacingly. Whoosh! Yi Fan's Ever-Fire whip of light was blazing red, and flames soared into the sky. One was the essence of 10,000 souls, evil and ferocious, while the other was the blazing divine weapon, auspicious and rising. Two divine weapons, one righteous and one evil, one yin and one yang. The two whips of light, one blue and one red, instantly met in the air. Boom! Blue light splattered, and blood splattered everywhere. The soul-slaying saber's flaming whip of light was instantly cut off by the Everfire sword's flaming dragon whip of light, turning into specks of light that scattered with the wind. Whoosh! After the flaming dragon whip of light cut off the flaming whip of light, its momentum did not diminish, and its speed did not decrease. It continued to whip toward Madame of Bones at high speed. The light of the flaming dragon whip of light illuminated Madame of Bones' face. She had never imagined that the soul-slaying saber that she had been so proud of in the demon realm for hundreds of years would be so easily cut off. Ruoshue, be careful! In a flash, Mr. White Bones reminded the stunned Madame of Bones as he waved the yin-yang wind and fire fan in his hand toward the flaming dragon whip of light. Whoosh! 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 Mr. White Bones knew how powerful the flaming dragon whip of light was, and he waved the fan in his hand 3 times. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh! After the 3rd time, a strong wind blew, and a violent storm appeared. Whoosh! The violent wind blew the flaming whip of light 3 feet to the right. The flaming whip of light brushed past the couple, and went straight toward the ground. Boom! The ground shook, and dust flew everywhere. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.